the other. You have to remain vulnerable to harm, to damage, to shame, to folly. If you ever want to achieve greatness, or even love, or even just kind of belonging together.
Again.
Yeah. That's where I was going with that. Thanks for picking up on that.
I mean, there's something interesting. I mean, with vulnerability, I think also we have a way of reinterpreting terms in a manner that become their opposite. And what I mean by that is a lot of times what we define as vulnerability now is, say, telling people your emotional state or what's going on inside. But then we also make that mine in my personal experience. So actually, I'm being vulnerable, but I'm not vulnerable because the thing I'm being vulnerable about you can't critique.
Yeah.
Right. But this is, I think, really important, because if we knew that we weren't being vulnerable, then we couldn't tell ourselves that we're vulnerable people, right? So we have to define being vulnerable in such a manner that we can convince ourselves we're being vulnerable while simultaneously doing it in such a way that cannot be critiqued, right? And so there's this kind of insulation that occurs in a lot of values.
I think that's one of these things that could never be spoken. One of these things that must always be implicit, and just like scapegoating. The moment you make it explicit, you break the relation, and it's only ever impossible in an inverted, it's like a reification, but a reversion at the same time.
Yeah.
Because the reason we want to make it explicit, and also the reason we can't make it explicit, is because it comes back down to our identity and ego and reputation and how am I being perceived by the other. And it's not about how am I being received by the other. It's about the ping pong that happens on the field of this mutual recognition. It can't be spoken. It can't be codified. It can't be a programming language. It has to be an emergent human quality and an emergent human decision. I decide to be in this space with you, and because I see you as the other, I implicitly trust that you are willing to do the same for me. And we go out together into the wilderness, as opposed to I am the adventurer and you will bear my burden or whatever.
Yeah. Well, I mean, a distinction that I always like to bring up, based on my, how I'll take my beloved Ivan Illich, is the difference between prepare and plan. And we have a society where the entire social order and education, all that, is about planning the future, knowing what's going to happen in 5 years, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. When that automatically means you're using human thinking in service of something that is more AI-like. It's more like a program. Actually, you're creating a program, right? Well, then under an emphasis of planning, it is not clear what the human intelligence does that is uniquely human, as opposed to it can be outsourced, right? Where preparing, I think about preparing. You don't know what's going to occur, but whatever comes up, you're ready for it, right? I think I always we were talking about the hip hop cipher. My beloved Bernard talks about organizations need to be like the hip hop cipher, which the key is preparation is where you go, whatever arises, I will be ready for it, right? But you're actually not trying to stop or plan away an unexpected or bad thing to occur. When really we can associate, if we overly emphasize planning, then a smart, responsible person is someone who has plans to make sure bad things don't happen, right? Where if we're prepared, actually one's intellectual, human, etc. maturity is precisely in the moments of the unexpected. It's precisely in the moments where something you don't know is going to occur. And basically, if all of our rationality, emotionalism, relationships are in the direction of planning, then they're in the direction of programming. And then they will be, basically, they are outsourced to some artificial intelligence. Because there's always the question of what's the opposite of an artificial intelligence. And I think basically it's a discerning intelligence. It's an it's a situational intelligence that is live in the situation. But then for me, I guess I also say that because if we're talking about vulnerability and it's in a plan model versus a prepare model, then it becomes its opposite. If you're talking about risk and it's in a how do we plan risk versus be prepared risk, you're using the word risk, but you're actually just talking about a problem you're going to solve.
Yes.
Based on the horizon in which the term or value is situated within, it can become its opposite.
Yeah.
And so we were also talking about the difference between conversation and communication.
Yeah.
Right? Communication has a certain, we know we have a plan. You could say basically a lot of small talk has basically a certain plan, a preset idea of where it's going to go and where it's going to end up, and that's also why I can kind of feel artificiated, right? But there's a certain openness in conversation that has to be preserved. I mean, if that openness is not, and I'll give it to you. I mean, if that openness is not preserved, then you can't have conviviality. Well, I guess another way to put it is if the thing is closed and pre-known, of course there's going to be manipulation, even if people are not trying to be manipulated, because you have to get back on track. You have to get back on the path, right? So people will, even they almost just emergently will be guiding one another back in that direction. To be convivial, it's hand in hand with wandering steps and flow, kind of thing. But that has to have a certain openness. And if we don't have that openness, I'm not sure if there's any value or any positive principle that, if not situated in an open horizon, as I'm calling it, doesn't become its opposite. It almost seems everything becomes its opposite without that opening.
Well, guys.
Hey there.
Welcome.
What's up, Dave?
Can you guys see who else is in this call?
Oh my goodness, look at the beautiful people. We're in the garage. I always, Matthew, look at it. Thank y'all for, I grew up in my garage, so this is like childhood for me. This is where I grew up, so it's great.
Let's do a quick little sound check. Are the levels more, like, when you are listening on your headphones there, am I coming through a lot louder than Daniel? And because what they were doing was holding that microphone between them. But we might want to pass it back and forth like it's a thing they talk straight into, because I've got mine a lot closer to my mouth.
Here, I'm talking now at a comfortable level. How does that sound in relation to Dave?
Dave's significantly louder, but you sound good.
Sweet.
Well, I would say definitely try to hand it back and forth. You guys won't be talking for a portion of it, and then when we but you are talking right now, and it sounds like what you're talking about is the distinction between preparing and planning. Is that right? And could we talk about that distinction also in terms of on the side of prepping, we're also talking about tending and cultivating, whereas on the side of preparing, we're talking about development and building. It's a more instrumental kind of thing. Would you go for that distinction? Do these all work like on those two sides, or?
I think that's totally fine. I mean, the other thing is, it's not that planning is necessarily
Stick it
bad.
in his face.
Yeah, I'll hold it. It's not that planning is necessarily bad. It's when it comes to dominate over preparing. So typically you can have preparing and then also planning, but if planning becomes the dominant emphasis of the society, you lose preparing. And actually you ultimately lose both, because what are you making the plan even for, right? It kind of becomes empty in different things.
And it becomes the churn. It becomes the paperclip maximizer. It becomes the plan propagating itself, as opposed to this kind of ambiguity, this uncertain creature that is man. Making the world around him, co-creating the world around him. Participation is a word that we often use here. We use it in this kind of Levy-Bruhl sense. But for the last day, we've been using it in a better sense, in a more improvisational sense. Jazz music is a type of participation. Jazz musicians, they get into the pocket, they get into the rhythm, they get on the wavelength with one another. And to be into jazz is where Dorno sucks. To be into jazz, you can't sit on the sidelines. To be into jazz, you have to be of the mind of, I am participating in this moment. I am co-responsible for this moment. There is risk. I could flubber. I could flub. I could fumble. I could ruin the whole show. But if you approach it with trust and excellence, human excellence is important here. We're not horizontalists. If you approach it in this way and you're in the pocket, you're in the rhythm, you're on the wavelength, you have a type of recognition with your fellow musicians, you can improvise. You can participate in the construction of a beautiful musical canvas.
So this is a lecture that Theory Underground people are coming in on, and outside of the people who are currently present, we might have some people show up in the midst of this call, some of them virtually, I mean, also potentially right here in front of us. These are all empty seats right now. What I'm going to show you all before we move on, and I tie the connection between what we were just talking about and what's on the roster for the day, I want to quickly and first do something special here. A lot of you have probably heard or seen stuff about the Agora at this point. But what I'm about to do is give you all a sneak peek into what this space currently looks like. But first, I have to mute ourselves from one computer so that when I turn on. All right, can you guys hear me now? You guys hear me from this other device? Perfect. And Rebecca just joined. Rebecca's here now. That's so cool. Hi, Rebecca. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Hey, Daniel just said Rebecca. Now, here I'll bring them.
Hi, everyone. Oh my goodness, Rebecca, good to see you. To everyone, so lovely. My goodness.
All right. You can just go. This is the beautiful outdoors here in Virginia, and this is their house. And I love the view right here. But as you see, we turned. Now we can walk towards this garage. And oh, what's going on over here? Oh, what's going on over here? I feel like a boomer who holds the tablet to make the video.
The tablet.
This is the camera.
Say hi to your aunt.
I'm-
Say hi to your aunt.
I'm using a laptop to do camera things. But anyway, now that you've all been able to see it there, I'm gonna go ahead. Oh, and in fact, for anyone who hasn't seen the actual power podium here, it has a actual Timenergy made out of steel symbol there. That's the power podium, and as you see over here, it's got that virtual mixer doing a lot of work. Okay, now that's all something that hopefully people will be able to see on the recording for the Zoom side. That's why I did what I did the way I did it. Now I'm gonna mute from this side and we'll go on mute from that side and get on with that button. And now we're back. So now you can all hear us over here, right? So fantastic. Today we're talking about retroversion and schooling. And I think we want to start by saying a little bit about schooling and retroversion, of course. We want to start that way. But there's a problem with starting, and I don't want to get stuck in the idea of starting. I think most of our lives are spent starting, and then we never actually do anything because we put way too much thought into the starting of the thing that we want to do in the first, instead of just getting after it, right? And part of the problem is that people get this idea that there's some kind of intro level thing that you have to do, some kinds of T's that have to be crossed and I's that have to be dotted. And it's like, no, you can actually just dive in the deep end, start failing, and you will find your bearings. And so if anyone's been paying attention for the last month and a half, if you've come to, I don't know, at least 3 of the different things that we've done, Rebecca's done a fantastic job giving the 30-second version of retroversion and of the treating the unknown in a discourse like algebraic placeholders that will be retroactively filled in through retroversion, which is the essence of meaning making, the essence of language, the essence of logic, the essence of everything that makes us the language beings that we are. But I want to go deeper today and get a little meta and do it all in one place so that there's a contained unit people can go look into if they're thinking about retroversion. This is the first in the series on the fundamental problems and core concepts at Theory Underground, where the concept that we're talking about is not a Theory Underground concept. Right now, I want to do one on surplus value and labor power, and that's obviously going to be a Marx kind of month. I want to do one on being in the world, and that's obviously going to be like a Heidegger month. We're talking about Dasein and stuff like that. There's all these different months where we will be talking about other people's concepts. It's not just Theory Underground concepts, right? Like the 3 crises. Well, that formulation, putting it that way, setting up Theory Underground as a response to the three crises. That is a specifically theory underground approach, specifically me thing. But at this point, everyone is using that language because it's obvious that that is the main three fields, or that those are the main three fields that are colliding, that we find ourselves between, which would be the attention economy, academia, and activism. And some people have no background in activism. They're coming in to radical theory, and that brings them around activists. And you've got other people, they've been activists, but they've never been around academics. Everyone's been around influencers on the attention economy, presumably. But these are three different fields, and they have fundamentally different conditions of possibility. They have different explicit incentive structures. They also have objective material differences in terms of what can be won or lost, right? But, you know, in short, respect, honor, recognition, which is all to say symbolic capital, exists in all three fields, but in different ways. And you can actually convert one kind of cultural and social capital into another. And you can take your symbolic capital that might be waning, or it's just steady state, nothing's really happening with it. And then you could, by renouncing it, move into, say, the attention economy, and you could cash out that academic symbolic capital that would have gotten you nowhere or would have taken a lot longer, and then you can actually make something of it. And so, like, you know, Natalie Wynn of ContraPoints is a great example of somebody who makes this big video. I left academia, here's why. This is now popular. A lot of people do this. And if you critique academia while moving into the attention economy, there's a way that you can convert this low symbolic capital into a higher one. But that can also work the opposite direction. And of course, you know, outside of the three fields that we're focused on, people move from politics into business, or from business into politics, or from politics into the church, or into church into etc. And so the transfer of capitals and their exchange rates, also their growth rates, and how those things change over time, these are all big questions for us all. Not actually in any way, shape, or form anything that I'm equipped to really say much more than I've already been saying for the last year. I'm trying to set up the field so that there's a lot of play room for everyone to be able to make serious advances, right? And I mainly am here to facilitate the meeting of people who've spent a lot of time in this field or that field and are aware that there's a crisis in this field, to all start talking to each other instead of past each other, but not just for the sake of some niche removed academic thing, but instead for more like what we're doing here with the Agora, which is to train ourselves to cultivate the conditions for that working class intellectual renaissance or revolution. All right, so this is sort of, but there is no start, there is no beginning, there is only the wavelength and getting in on it. And so right now, you're all being looped in on a conversation, and maybe if you're like Luke or Rebecca and you got here when it was already rolling, you're like, oh, what happened in those first 10 minutes? Well, I hate to break it to you, but before those 10 minutes, there was actually all morning. And before the morning, there was all of last night. And it's all the same freaking wavelength, and the same kinds of threads keep coming up. And so if you came in being like, well, what happened in the last 10 minutes? Well, really what happened in the last 24 hours? And then, of course, we could sit there and try to give you like a canned or scripted or summarized version of what happened, or we could just kind of keep going and loop you in when it feels necessary. Because for the most part here, I think most of what you guys were talking about, people were instantly getting it. Matthew was instantly saying some stuff. For instance, he said, planning is about producing an outcome, but preparing invites an outcome, right? This is about inviting. This is about inviting. Now, of course, it had to be built. I had to go on a vision quest. I had to get Anthony and Ricky and Chris in on the basics of the vision, which is kind of crazy because they're not theory people. So there's a lot of stuff about the Agora that feels like, well, you would need to know theory to even see the sort of problems that we're a response to. But that's not true. That's not true at all. Yeah, people know that there's no place where you can just go and say your piece and be heard by the public. And everyone knows that we're living in the niches. People haven't got sense for the post-class fractured mass. It seems to me like intellectuals are the main people who need the PCFM thesis because they're the only ones who think in terms of society. Of course, though, you do have workers who talk about, well, Democrats and Republicans, and they do this totalizing thing. And we all do that, sort of generalizing. We all do it. But it's intellectuals especially for whom it really means something, I think. And they themselves, all of us, we, as intellectuals, reproduce certain norms, expectations, and incentive structures or criteria or normalizing systems that naturalize the relations of production and its implicit meritocracy, which is a product of the schooling system. And so I want to start with something about the schooling system. And I know Matthew's got some good stuff on the schooled brain. I know that Daniel's got some good stuff on the schooled brain. I think we could all probably take a stab at saying what's wrong with the schooled brain syndrome. Like, what is it really? Like, if we were to say 20 to 30 seconds, like really quick versions, like, what is it? And so then I think the email I sent out already has framed things so that people are already kind of knowing where I'm going. And so I'll just say it because I don't think that I already primed you all anyway. And it's like this sort of expectation of a linear progression, of there being an actual beginning. And if you didn't get the beginning, then you can't get something out of it later, which I think makes sense to a certain extent if we're talking about, elementary mathematics or something like that, right? Of course, like there's higher levels where you're going to have problems, but also though, I think her name is something Boller, Boellerer. I think that's her last name. She's got this book called Mathematical Mindsets. You know about that one? You guys, anyone here know about that? Yeah. So it's a fantastic book about how even math can be retroversive. Meaning you can just throw people into a problem, a puzzle, and have them puzzle it out. And then once they have found solutions, teach them how to abstract from their solution the principle that was underlying that intuition that they were using to game out the solution. And then by teasing out the principle, then you can get to, oh, there's this function. And oh, that thing, that solution you came up with, that's an actual function in mathematics. Did you know that Galileo discovered it? You just discovered it on your own. Now let's sit here and figure out what did he do with that to go beyond it or whatever. And you can do that with all of the famous mathematicians who are also philosophers and natural philosophers, which is exciting because it means that there's a kind of education presumably available. And I'm imagining it is being practiced because people like Miss Bullard, they exist, where there's not a room with 25 to 150 students at an arbitrary time in the day being told that for the next 50 minutes, you better focus on this or we're going to shame you like X, Y, and Z people, class clown, falling asleep person who didn't do homework, who we make examples of through ritually hazing via the grading system, putting on the short bus that takes you off to the remedial place versus the other short bus that takes you to the international baccalaureate, right? Now, Anne was on the special kid bus, international baccalaureate, gifted and talented. And, I think there's a book in her, she indicated this last week. There's some kind of a book in her about recovering from being gifted, right? So there's her with her own anxieties and neuroses about performing in a certain kind of way that can make a certain kind of authority happy. And that's and really wanting to succeed in doing that means reading the user manual, studying the syllabus, really honing in on the explicit rules. And that's all great, yeah? But also life doesn't always work that way. So when life works out that way, fantastic. She has a superpower I do not have because a lot of things do work that way. But there's also a lot of things that don't work that way. And for that reason, I have a superpower as well. The point is never to say that the people who are being filtered through the schooling system into the top 10% of society, and not all of them, by the way, obviously get there, but they're ostensibly on their way there. It's not to say that they're broken or that they are wrong, because it genuinely might come down to a certain kind of learning style. There might be something about a predisposition that's working for them. But the issue is that, and I think John Taylor Gatto is really good on this, and I hope some of you read the introduction to his Weapons of Mass Destruction in preparation for today. He says somewhere in there that if Becky and Bill, I'm just pulling names out, I don't know what names he actually uses, but like if Becky and Bill are both in a class learning how to read, and Bill is really fast in getting it, and so they keep moving him out of classes into higher levels or whatever, or giving him like, bespoke assignments, while everyone else is kind of just like at the level of whatever that grade is supposed to be. If Becky's not able to get to that level that Billy shot past, and now she's getting left behind by her peers and the teacher, and maybe she gets put into remedial, maybe she has extra things that she has to do. Maybe it takes her 15 years to get to the level that Bill's at by the time that Bill's reading The Science of Logic. Or is it The Logic of Science? It's The Science of Logic, right? It's The Science of Logic. Yeah. So he's reading The Science of Logic. Well, if it takes her 15 years to get to that level, at the point that she's at that level, he says, they're on the same level. Who cares if it took her so much longer to get to that level? She might have had bigger fish to fry. She might have had bigger preoccupations, interests, calling her talents that she was called to cultivate. So that doesn't mean that she's lesser. And I think that this is such a no duh kind of point that it feels genuinely foolish to make it. I feel almost embarrassed to have to say it, because it's like, well, no duh. We all know that. But of course we know that. But there's going to be someone here who's really not thought about it in a while. So a lot of us might know it, but then we forget about it. So I would say the same thing goes for being in time, right? So I love being in time. I want to read it every couple years, and I want to do that probably for the rest of my life. But if it takes you 20 years to get to the point where you're able to join me on that wavelength, at the point that you're on it, you're on it. It doesn't mean that you're going to get as much from a first pass as I will from my 10th pass. No, but once you're at the level, you're at the level. And not everyone needs to be at that level. Not everyone needs to be reading dense theory. Not everybody needs to be doing calculus, right? And so there is this whole question of like, but genuinely, what is necessary to learn to be a civically engaged person? And the point with retroversion is that we want to break out of this schooled mindset where we feel so much guilt and shame and pressure to perform up to a certain level so as to be in some kind of a relation to our peers vis-a-vis the gaze of an authority figure. That's my lecture. And now we're just talking about it. And so I really want to, I said linear this, linear that. That's my main sort of summary of the schooled mentality. I'm hoping that we can hear from other people who've put a lot of thought into this. A couple of initial, like 30 to 50 second summaries of what you think the main issue is. Let's go beyond linear. And then we'll come back to the John Taylor Gatto book and the introduction or the prologue, sorry. It's a prologue, it's not an introduction. The prologue that some of you have read. And I'm hoping someone has it handy. I thought Anne would be here and that she would have it handy. So I'm hoping some of you have it handy. Galen's probably got it. Because I want to actually read the 6 points there in the prologue of like what the schooling system is doing implicitly. And we'll see how many of those points we've already kind of hit on. But we'll do that after we give Daniel the floor here. So welcome back on here, sir. Yeah.
Well, I would just say I associate the school with one is a brilliant distinction between schooling and education that Matthew Stanley puts forth. So that's very, very good.
Yeah, that's one Gatto uses, yeah.
And I also think what you're saying about the wavelength is I would associate with, that's a matter of preparation. I associate needing lineality and sequence with planning because you got to go to step 1, step 2, step 3, and so on and so forth. A characteristic that is big for me on the schooled mind, based on Neil Postman's teaching as the Version Act, is the associate. We are subconscious, where he goes through thinking about the classroom as a medium. So he applies the medium as the
Yes.
to the schoolroom, and he's asking the questions: what are the associations you absorb from the medium of the classroom? And the big one that I always take is that an educated person is good at trivia. Someone knows the answer, and whoever answers the question fastest wins. And you're going to be asked random questions on a test, and if you studied well, you'd be able to learn. So we have and we see this actually. I mean, we have a culture where we associated being intelligent with being good at trivia, with being able to answer random questions that people will ask you, as opposed to thinking through a topic. And that actually, I think, lends itself to the nervousness of wanting to make sure that you've gone to step 1 to step 2, step 3, step 4, and not just jump on the wavelength. Because also, too, you associate subconsciously intellectual activity or an intellectual space where you might be asked a question that if you know the answer to, you were the bad student. You didn't know the trivia question. So I would just, as an opening thought, and I'm happy to go into more, I associate, and I really do think this association with thinking and trivia is absolutely culturally one of the main things hindering us from the recreation of a social, to deepening conversation, to extend humanity versus have it replaced. I think basically the trivia mindset also lends itself directly to AI, because AI give a prompt, I get an answer. It's perfect.
I know people think it's intelligence.
Yeah, it's trivia, really. But if that's the only thing you associate being intelligence with is being good at trivia, then that is human intelligence, right? And also, the key to trivia is that somebody knows the answer. So there's always a big up. There's always someone in the room that will know the answer and thus be able to confirm you if you have the right answer. When really human thinking is a deepening where nobody in the room knows the subject. One of the answer, the reason we are together is to see where it goes and to participate in that activity together. Which again, if you have such deeply schooled mind, it's hard to even know that this possibility of interaction with other people exists. And also, I think the culture of people constantly like looking up facts on their cell phone is actually tied to the trivia mindset.
It is.
Because
It is.
I want to get the answer. Oh, someone talked about. Let me look.
They're not even like trying to figure it. Like part of the point of like not looking it up immediately, which we never had to think about because it just wasn't possible.
Yeah.
But back when that was the way it was, and that's how it's been for the last couple of weeks for me without a phone, it's like you actually just have to sit there and go, well, it's either this or that. Could it be something else? And then you go, oh, well, it could be that. You go, it's probably this though. And then you sit there and what you're doing is modal calculus. You are weighing probabilities and you're deducing, inferring, you're inferring. And as you do that, it develops your ability to calibrate what's probable. And people aren't even doing that. They're just going straight to the answer. And it's like, but that might not even be the answer. So like, but the guessing part and the thinking, well, why would it be this as opposed to, I think that's the more important thing.
Well, and I'll just say as one last thing. First off, I think also Mr. Stanley has been talking about Molark theory, which I think is very important. The inability, the trivia mindset leads to Molark, basically, where rationality basically it's bureaucratized. Somebody knows the answer, and you're using human thinking basically to end up devoured by some sort of autonomous rationality. Planning goes in that direction. Preparation is work, because preparation is an internal work, right? And also, basically, getting on the wavelength is a preparatory activity where you're prepared to be able to let something wash over you, to participate in it, to go with the flow. The other thing that I think is actually quite fascinating, I've been reading a lot about 16th century polymath culture. And actually a lot of what you were saying about math, like seeing the principle deriving, it's actually quite extraordinary to see this kind of polymathic culture that followed that. We tend to associate the polymath with the Renaissance man or somebody that knew a lot of things, but actually it's an entirely different theory of learning that I'm happy to go into.
We should later.
I think it's really, really important because that polymathic culture is a wavelength culture where people are throwing themselves into the deep end. And the other experiment is the hole in the wall education experiment, where you just throw kids a computer and they teach themselves chemistry and the language and different things. Because critically, they don't know there's a wrong answer. They don't know there's a wrong way to do this. They're just trying to figure out how to to solve it and to go from there in different things, right? But basically, if you Blondel, this is the point. There's a lovely book called Action by Marcis Blondel. And Heidegger actually liked this. He sent one of his students to go speak with Marcis. And there's an interesting idea that Blondel is putting forth, where he says, the moment you're certain about something, you don't care about it anymore. Once I know a thing, I don't care. And he's actually arguing that when we have an education system, or like the self, in the moment, like we cared about the topic when we didn't know the answer, but once you look it up, we no longer care about it. We move on, right? And critically, Marcis, now it's an entirely elaborate theory of metaphysics, but there is a point where he says action is only possible where there is uncertainty. Action, as opposed to simply sequence, requires a not knowing what's going on, because action is tied to the working out of an internal faculty that allows you to make a discernment that is not in given. So if you have an education that is all about, if you have education that is all about certainty, then it's anti-action. It actually removes action. And all you're going to have is causality. Well, of course, causality favors what? The program, the artificial intelligence, the machine. So if you want action, you have to have people develop those internal resources to be able to, not know. And to actually go, oh, nobody knows the answer? Oh, we can have a real conversation. Instead of where it's like, nobody knows the answer, well, I guess we have nothing to talk about. We actually associate the lack, we've been trained to associate the lack of an answer with there's nothing to learn. When actually that's where the action of learning is actually possible. But the schooled mind has been unfortunately very costly to us, I think.
That's a perfect little tie-in here. Now, there's a little bump in the road here that is going to be programmed out of existence in the future, but for now requires me to mute us whenever a participant from the Zoom side speaks, because you'll be coming in over the speaker here so that we don't all have to wear headphones, which is messy and Bluetoothy. And, Bluetooth is a disaster right now. It's a 1990 technology that has not been adapted to the current situation. That's why it keeps getting worse instead of better. But Matthew, I was wondering if I can put you on the spot here to talk a little bit about how you think about the schooled brain, and not just for us, but kind of for the ostensible fly on the wall or a hole in the wall, like person in the future listening in on this. Your approach to schooling, how you've been thinking about it. I said 30 to 50 seconds. Daniel just showed us what that means. So feel free here and empowered to say what you want as long as you need to, without,
Well, I would never presume to take a 30 to 50 seconds a Daniel, because I think time does move slower for him. That's why he's able to get so much done. I will try to be quick. There's a lot of things to say. I like that you focus on like the myth of a beginning and sequence. That's not an angle that I had taken before. But I think it's related to the question of curriculum and the search for a standardized approach to producing understanding in another person. Like it's the search for and the belief in the possibility of a standardizable sequence that someone could be led through to reliably produce knowledge or understanding. And I think that is kind of this myth that is believed. And then it's also, because it's believed, it's then sought. So that would be how I would connect into what you were talking about. But one of the things I focus on with the schooled mind is the need for recognition, is that the schooled mind is trained that it has to perform something under the eye of the authority figure in order for that whatever is performed in the eye of the authority figure is the realest thing. And it's funny because I just read Foucault's lectures, Security, Territory, Population, and he talks about how the idea of asceticism is a counterconduct against pastoral power. And the reason for that is because it allows the ascetic to develop a relationship which does not include the authority figure, where actually the ascetic creates an internal challenge, and the standard of their growth is not observable or verified by the authority figure, but it's actually their own internal experience of the challenge and of the pain of coming up against and overcoming the limit. And so they're actually able to establish their own internal standard and relation to what they're doing that doesn't require any sort of outside eye or intervention to observe, measure, or validate for them. And this is why he says that asceticism has this subversive quality to it, because it allows you to go outside of the purview of the authority figure and develop in your own self-cultivation, and develop your own internal standard of what you're trying to do, that you're constantly kind of modulating only in relation to your own experience. And I think that that's what learning needs to become, is something that is developed internally. Now we want to talk about guides and things like that, because clearly there's TU has this element of Dave is guiding in some way. He's facilitating, creating space, he's sharing concepts. But learning has to be a little bit more like asceticism, where you're kind of developing your own internal challenge and standard, and in a way that cannot ultimately be validated by the eye of the big other, basically.
Yes. So then, thank you, Matthew. That was really good. And I think that, yeah, it's kind of surprising. We talked as long as we did without talking about standardization and curriculum, because those are such a big part of it all. And so just to kind of go off of what we have so far before I kind of turn it to Nance here, I'll ask you a couple pointed questions that you can either respond to, or you can riff off of anything that's come up so far, of course. But and by the way, quick little aside, I didn't know Postman wrote a book called
Teaching as conversive.
I didn't know that. Oh
That's
my
the one
gosh.
Teaching as conversive.
Oh my god. So
Teaching and conversing.
so
It's
he
also called the end of education.
oh my gosh. Postman, because I was talking about the school as a medium last week to my students when I was trying to tie together Amusing Ourselves to Death and Gatto's Weapons of Mass Destruction. And when I was doing that, I had no idea that Postman had already said that.
Oh, his education books are the big ones, but those are the ones that I'm like, just the pages are all ripped up going through
Oh
with the
my
notes.
god.
Highly suggestive education.
Yes. Yes. Okay. Now, so what we have is linear, the myth of the beginning. We have trivia, and as Galen said, the quick recall team. We have, and by the way, I wanted to say on that, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? That guy won. What a genius! It's like, for what? What could you? Well, outside of Who Wants to Be outside of a game show, this guy has no value anywhere else. Like, what is that? You're the kind of person who like feels inspired by that, who collects random bits of information. People think that person makes a good dinner guest because like they think random. It's like, oh, that mountain has a name. It's like it's just a random stuff. Does that person know about the biome that mountain is in? Like, no, the name. Okay, great. Well, who gives a shit? Okay, so that's trivia, linear, the myth of the linear, and then we have knowing as not caring, totalization. Right, so I wanted to bring in totalization just to say, right, for Levinas, in the same way that retroversion is like this sort of basis for meaning making, so one of the main mechanisms for meaning making, which now we've talked enough at this point, I might as well define my term. It is the retroactive filling in the blank or the algebraic placeholder of the term that came up. And so retroversion, though I did say that earlier, it might only start to make sense
after the fact.
Yeah, now that I brought it up again through use, right? And so we've got Michelle joining us now. Welcome, Michelle. Great to have you. We'd love to post you up somewhere comfortable. I mean, that's a dinky little chair, but we also have the, we also have this thing that Daniel's very proud of.
Yeah, it's a recliner that has wheels, so you can move it around outside and visit the mailbox. Oh yeah, look at that. I love this thing. What's it there?
Yeah.
I can
Yeah,
push
it
her to the
depends
mailbox.
on the baby wants to sit, you know? So
Yeah.
we might get up and move it.
That's totally fine, and you can leave whenever you like. You're so Michelle, you're coming in on the middle of us basically just talking about the various things that the schooling mindset uh, trains the people who are very good at school into thinking, but also the people who then think themselves stupid. You know, oh, I didn't get the basics. I didn't get the intro level, so now I can't learn about this thing because you're all at this higher level, and it makes people feel like they can't just dive in the deep end, get with the wavelength, feel the drift, get looped in on X, Y, and Z terms as it goes. That makes them feel like that's all somehow wrong, right? And it makes them feel like they're not cut for the thing. And so, Will, by the way, if at any point that you do want to interject, we can always mic you. We can always share the ones that we have here, but you can also just be our glorified audience. So yeah.
I so appreciate the lazy boy on wheels, but I might actually move this so that I can like sit with y'all and then they can
Perfect.
see y'all.
Cool. Yeah, 100%. Oh, they can see us here as well.
Okay.
They do. Yeah, they can see us all over here. But no. You guys are great. Perfect. But it's a perfect little it's a perfect kind of demonstration here, Michelle. The fact that you are coming in on the middle of it is a perfect demonstration of our very point, which is that that's fine, and that anyone who's a real learner will figure out that that's a part of it. Okay, but with all that said, Nance, so we've said a lot, we've covered a lot. The only other part, so linearity, trivia, the trivia mentality, knowing as not caring, and that's where I was bringing in Levinas, right? Like I was saying, retroversion as a base part of meaning making. Well, so is totalization, which is pigeonholing, which is saying, oh, now I got that. I know that person is good or bad. I put them over here in this little category, and now I know how to relate to them. But because people don't live in pigeonholes and people explode pigeonholes or categories, it makes us feel insecure or weird. Like, what's that person all about, actually? I totally got them wrong. Well, yeah, open your mind is all Levinas is really saying. Open your mind to the infinity of the other. The other will explode those coordinates. Then we had the whole thing on the standardized curriculum and the need for recognition that Matthew brought in, which is fantastic. All right.
One of my favorite games I used to play with one of my old friends, who's no longer around, is he would go through the dictionary, the Oxford Unabridged English Dictionary, and I used to have a lot of books as well. I lost all my possessions at one point in time, and that's a cool story. But we used to go through the dictionary. He would randomly select a word and say it, and I would try to say the meaning, try to set the etymology, try to come up with some synonyms, and just try to get it. So it was a kind of trivia, but it was also I think it was deeper than that. I think it's interesting that we're talking about like mathematizing the world, but also using math as a kind of doorway into learning as opposed to schooling, or education as opposed to schooling. And once you kind of derive a principle and abstract it, it builds you up as a type of bildung as opposed to brick and mortar one-on-one mathematical building. Um, But I also, I mean, it lacked the other day when it came time for Q&A. Some guy asked the question between Kierkegaard and Levinas. It was a very good question, and the answer I gave him was, answers don't exist. Stop looking for answers. And I think that's a current I'm kind of picking up on over the last 24 hours is the ambiguity, the negativity, the gap, the uncertainty. That is the playing field upon which this creature known as man plays the game of humanness. And of course, we have to cope with material limits. Of course, we have to cope with bare life and necessity. So we need systems that kind of allow us to do these things. I think I'm rather pessimistic of late, but I keep coming back to scale. I keep coming back to like, we've got to change the way we do things because it's just not conducive to human congress to try to think like this is the way it must be done. This is the way things must be done to support this, vast global system. So I don't know. I think that's maybe a tightrope I'm walking right now, trying to think my way through. Like, how do we maintain systems that support conviviality without allowing them to become manipulative, while also dealing with necessity? I don't want to find myself in the space of high in the pie in the sky idealism, utopianism.
High in the pie in the
High
sky.
in the pie in the sky. But I think we're living at a moment where there might be some more interesting emergent solutions as opposed to like codified. This is how it's always done. I think people might discover new forms of autonomous activity that allow them to stop thinking on the global scale, and maybe that sounds horrible to say, but really start thinking on the hyperlocal scale, in the family, immediate connections, the people with whom you can have conversation, as opposed to this kind of fetishized communication. Another thing kind of came up. We were talking about conversation communication, but we're also talking about communication as a cybernetic term. It's like communication has to deal with control, and it has to deal with data carrying uninformed information from point A to point B, so it can keep the machine operating. Humans are machines. We are metabolic things. We are animals. However, we're also something that I'm comfortable calling spiritual. We have something that I'm comfortable referring to as a soul, and I think that's necessarily an ambiguity, and I think that's necessarily can't be codified, can't be mechanized, can't be mathematized, or else you lose it the minute you codify it. Naming the thing negates the thing. And yeah, yeah.
I think that's a perfect point to interject. So there's this sort of like lecture, and then there's this sort of like podcast, and then there's this sort of like Q&A sort of mashup. We're kind of fractally moving between all three. And what I want to do right here is see if Galen actually has those 6 points from the prologue ready to hand. He does. All right, Galen. And then I'll mute us, and you could take the floor and just straight up, if you're down, just take it away.
Yeah, you just want me to read the six points there? Okay.
Sorry, one thing is maybe the paragraph before the 6 points too?
Sure.
Yeah.
So Inglis breaks down the actual purpose of modern schooling into 6 basic functions, any one of which is enough to curl the hair of those innocent enough to believe the 3 traditional goals of education listed earlier. The adjustive or the adaptive function. Schools are to establish fixed habits of reaction to authority. This of course precludes critical judgment completely. It also pretty much destroys the idea that useful or interesting material should be taught, because you can't test for reflexive obedience until you know whether you can make kids learn and do foolish and boring things. 2. The integrating function. This might well be called the conformity function, because its intention is to make children as alike as possible. People who conform are predictable, and this is of great use to those who wish to harness and manipulate a large labor force. 3. The diagnostic and directive function. School is meant to determine each student's proper social role. This is done by logging evidence mathematically and anecdotally on cumulative records, as in your permanent record. Yes, you do have one. 4. The differentiating function. Once their social role has been diagnosed, children are to be sorted by role and trained only so far as their destination in the social machine merits, and not one step farther. So much for making kids their personal best. 5. The selective function. This refers not to human choice at all, but to Darwin's theory of natural selection as applied to what he calls the favorable races. In short, the idea is to help things along by consciously attempting to improve the breeding stock. Schools are meant to tag the unfit with poor grades, remedial placements, and other punishments, clearly enough that their peers will accept them as inferior and effectively bar them from the reproductive sweepstakes. That's what all those little humiliations from first grade onward were intended to do: wash the dirt down the drain. 6. The propaedeutic function. The societal system implied by these rules will require an elite group of caretakers. To that end, a small fraction of kids will quietly be taught how to manage this continuing project, how to watch over and control a population deliberately dumbed down and declawed in order that the government might proceed unchallenged and corporations might never want for obedient labor.
What was the last function called?
The last one was called the propedeutic function.
Thank you. Yeah, great. All right, great job.
Thank you, Galen.
Yeah, thanks, Galen. And so the other quote there, Galen, if you got that handy still, that maybe you could pull up. It'll be fitting in about a minute and a half when I need it. Is the quote from the Carnegie Institute about what their ideal vision is for progressive education. And so maybe you'll be able to find that. But while you look, folks, I mean, you can already probably pick up on a little something I'm getting at here. And you've probably heard me talk about it before, but for anyone who's never heard it before, what really struck me from John Taylor Gatto in his Weapons of Mass Instruction, he's also the author of other books like Dumbing Us Down and all these other books, but they're all education related, right? He was a big time teacher in New York City, and he taught in these underfunded, racialized, sort of ghetto kinds of schools, but he also taught in very advanced, usually white kinds of schools. And his realization in both kinds of schools was like, there's a problem here. Both kinds of schools, there's a problem. The standards are being lowered, but the sort of universalized standard approach is also just a problem, even though those standards are being lowered. It's like there's a problem with the lowering of the standard, but there's a problem with the standardization approach itself. And he's a libertarian. A lot of the people who will critique him on the basis of his libertarianism. But if you only see those aspects of him that are libertarian, you're not paying attention. And I think especially anybody who's got any kind of a hope for the bettering of the situation for the working class, or like the 5 billion people who do the most essential work, the reproduction of society, the necessary labor. If you want a better working people's experience in life, well, then you usually get captured by the leftist impulse or the socialist impulse. I say captured. Other people would just say, oh, no, it's not a capturing. It's just that there's certain tendencies of the left that are predominant, and those are problematic, but I belong to the good left, and I hold the bad left to this higher standard, and I say, great, in the same way that the Garners might have a sort of reform mission for Christianity. Studebaker has a reform mission for the left. Lots of my friends have reform missions for various things like the left or like Christianity, and that's fantastic. That's fantastic. But also there is a sort of populist current in the right wing of America, of course, and there has been for a long time. And it is a often more libertarian approach, but not always. It doesn't have to be. It could be a very sort of authoritarian and conservative kind of approach. And so you have this libertarian approach, you have this more authoritarian approach, but both of those approaches will see a problem with public education today. But most of those critiques are not as based in this sort of working class history as John Taylor Gatto. So I really want to emphasize that it is John Taylor Gatto who was able to help me realize that the significant thing that happened in the 20th century that forever changed the game, the material, political, economic, cultural kind of game, is not just the professional managerial class or the managerial revolution. It's specifically the schooling system that the self-aware PMC at the early stages of their revolution actually advanced. And so there's a wonderful quote from, I think, 1907 when Woodrow Wilson was the president of Princeton. I used to say Harvard. I got it mixed up. And he said, we want and need two classes of people. One will be significantly larger than the other by necessity. From that larger class, we are not interested in finding the latent talents of would-be philosophers, poets, artists, scientists, inventors. No, he says, we have enough of those. No, well, but when he says we have enough of those, does he mean America has enough of those coming from this other class? Or does he mean we belonging to this other class have enough of those within our aristocratic sort of ranks? And of course, someone would say, no, don't you mean bourgeois? Well, maybe. There's obviously this question mark there. Is it bourgeois or is it aristocratic or is it both? Right? And so Woodrow Wilson saying we have enough of those, obviously for me, the problem is yeah, well, I don't want to reduce myself to a cog in a machine. I don't think most people feel good about forcing their kids who are round to fit into square holes, right? If we are pegs, well, then what kind of hole do we belong in? Well, the schooling system says if they don't fit into these certain holes, well, then they're out. They're just going to be garbage truck guys for the rest of their lives, which I say, well, that's freedom, right? In a sort of sense, it's actually a kind of freedom. But obviously, the bigger concern, I think, for those of us who think about the human as being a virtually purposive creature is not like, oh, how sad that person's picking vegetables their whole life. They could have been a scientist. No, it's not even that. There's even a nicer version of that we got from the guest appearance on Theory Underground from Leswin Laubscher of Duquesne University. He's a former chair of the psychology department there. He's a big-time Derridian Levinasian. And, you know, he takes people to Freud's old studio in Vienna. And then he takes people to Auschwitz, you know, in Poland. And then he also takes his students to where he grew up under apartheid as a dark-skinned man. And one of his grad students on the way out to one of the farms in South Africa somewhere was very excited about the interview questions that he was developing and the theoretical concepts he was going to apply to the interview with this farmer. Long story short, all of this graduate students' excitement and ideas about theory just kind of fell by the wayside once they were in actual conversation with this man who said, I was on track to become a doctor. My family was putting me forward as like the one in the family who had the best shot at success. When they closed down his school and said, you don't get to go to school anymore, black boy. You have to go work for the white farmer man. And he spent the rest of his life as a farmer. And of course, like, it's hard to think about that without getting choked up. And this student having that raw confrontation with this person's entire life just getting foreclosed was a sobering thing. And so it's easy for us to kind of just offhandedly refer to the person who has to work X, Y, or Z jobs, but they could have been an Einstein. And then think about the cost to society of having certain Einsteins not get discovered. And then we could talk about the cost of the person who was on track and then got sidelined. But our position's more radical than that. And mine, and now I say ours being like me and Nance, but I'm going to go further than that. I'm going to step out ahead of that and get a little metaphysical in a way that I don't normally get. And I'm going to say, this isn't actually metaphysics. I have an operating assumption. It's not a belief. And that operating assumption is that we all have inherent predispositions, and that something about your inherent predisposition, your nature coming up, rubbing against or meeting the resistance of the current situation, which includes other human beings and the actual where you live, the environment and all of it. The meeting of your disposition with all of the rest of that, there's the potential of a certain kind of talent to arise in the meeting of self and world, and that talent is like it's part your disposition, but it's also part the medium and its affordances. And then the actual problems humans are dealing with there, then, now, right? But if that talent goes undiscovered, I think it rots. I think it like rots inside of you and creates problems for you and other people. And then other things get blamed. Oh, this person's got this kind of disorder. Well, maybe they have rotting talent. Did you ever think about that? Or you could say suffocated talent. Instead of rotting, because then that makes you think it's beyond hope, we could think about it can't breathe. It's a flame that needs air, but instead you're smothering it. And that's a certain kind of like, I don't know why I'm sad, but I feel sad. But there's another kind of sad that where you did discover it and now that's foreclosed. That's that farmer. And so that's me. I have certain talents that I've not been able to cultivate under tutelage. I'm hopefully going to learn a little piano from you, right? I was learning some guitar a couple of weeks ago. I'm not saying I have a talent in that, no, but I feel called to do something with music, and I've never been able to follow in on that call. And for me, I think there might be something connected between feeling called to something, which is to say you're interested in it, you're pretty sure you could get passionate about it, and a talent. I think that people think of talent as like the inherent genius that just means that you're going to be good at something, and I think that's wrong. I think that real talent is having the ears to hear a calling and then finding the people to slipstream to move in on that. And so, like, that's the much stronger claim. Now, I'm not going to go the full length and say it's a metaphysical absolute that I take for granted. I know I'm saying it's an operating assumption. It makes sense. It makes people nod their heads vigorously whenever I talk about it. People think there's a there there. I think there's a there there. I think that's enough for us to be able to get some traction and keep moving without doing some full-on metaphysics or social ontology into that. I think we can just roll with this as an operating assumption for the rest of the conversation here and say the real job of schooling or of a school or of a schooling institution is to be a T3 institution, meaning, as Benjamin Studebaker put it, it's about time energy, it's about talent, it's about tutelage. It's about affording people socially the time energy so that they can discover and then cultivate talent under tutelage, right? So that's the vision, that's the dream, that's what we need to be advocating for, and doing so against this bludgeon that is schooling, that beats us down and demoralizes us and teaches us that if we don't have the 110 IQ or whatever, oh, well, then we're not really going to be able to be a part of X, Y, and Z kinds of conversations, and we wouldn't be able to contribute. Even though Nietzsche was writing to a very different kind of person, he said, the cow. He wants a reader who is a cow. That means slow, regurgitating, returning to the subject matter. Ruminating on the subject matter. That's literally, he uses that term in I think this is the introduction to the genealogy of morals, if anyone wants to look into it. But that's very different than the Speedy Gonzalez, oh, got it, on the go. Yep, 100%. Yep, I'm part of quick recall team, as Galen put it. Right? Like, oh, I'm sorry, Nietzsche was not writing to the quick recall team. He was writing to the Heideggers. Heidegger's like that kind of slow, lumbering, ant-like creature who walks the forest paths and mulls over the same idea his whole life. Treebeard. Yeah, Heidegger is Treebeard. Yeah, Rebecca said, gonna switch to my phone, gotta drive to the doctor's appointment. Hell yeah. Nicholas Montano says, no one knows Genlin, so don't want to sideline much with this comment, but yes, exactly. He puts forward his theory of the unique, never before in the world potential of humans to articulate a theory of anything that they have direct embodied experience of. Thinking at the edge is his work on this, relatively short paper. That's awesome. Matthew said, the problem for the right here is to tear down public schools and defund institutions, but then they just privatize education wholesale, use the market to judge education. They won't go all the way to critiquing schooling itself. And that actually was a perfect comment for bringing me back around to close up my sort of improv lecture part 2 here, which was just to say that but I mean, Gatto and Postman, if we have to choose a couple of popular authors to make canon and read with Marx and Heidegger and Levinas and Lacan and Bourdieu and Baudrillard, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, well, I really think Postman and Gatto are the main two. I would put Sherry Turkle in there as well. She's, no one gives her the credit that she deserves. But these are publicly accessible bestseller type authors, maybe from the 80s, 90s, early 2000s. I'm not saying that they're on the bestseller list anymore. Then they're gone and already forgotten by most people. Ehrenreich and Turkle are probably the two ladies that I would prioritize the most beyond Postman and Gatto as like, so we got two ladies, we got two men in the popular bestseller universe who fucking get it. Oh, sorry. I'm working on it. I swear to God, yeah. He doesn't know language yet. It's okay. She's got a baby. Yeah, he all just starts saying, fuck. Yeah. There was no little runners, but I was like, what about the baby? I don't know. All right, that's a lot. And is there a thread that I was weaving there that I left unwoven? And if not, we open it back up to discussion, I think. By the way, Woo, yes, Wukas is here. He joined a little, and he was like, "You're in the Garner space with Michelle and Daniel." Yes, look at them. They're right here. Yeah.
He made our day with the under the wing. We love you.
Can I say something really quick?
Absolutely.
So yeah, all great. Thanks for letting me just drop in. Hello, everybody. You guys are all awesome. So amazing to have you guys here. Like, I feel like I'm dreaming. I wanted to say that, yeah, this idea of like, can we actually question schooling itself? And I wonder if often it's not questioned because people are like, well, what are we going to do with the kids?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
how are we going to structure the time? What are we going to give them to do?
Yep.
What are they going to do? You know, because it's very nuts and bolts. These questions are really nuts and bolts. And like, I think, you know, Dave and I were getting into a great conversation in the kitchen about some of these things. It got me excited thinking about like stuff you could actually like engineer and program and design, you know, that can actually create structures for kids to be able to do something that's alternative. Now, there is a part of me that wonders if it's just not human nature to just find stuff to be a drag. Like, no matter what, no matter how innovative it is, no matter how interesting it is, like, will it inevitably just be will it just be like, okay, there's this cool new innovation in form, and then people are still just gonna be like, I'm gonna take the okay, good. Yeah, like, will people just inevitably still find a way to hate it? Like, it's just human nature. Like, it's just. So I mean, there's a part of me that's like my kind of devil's advocate question to all of it. So that's something that came to mind. But I do, you know, I was telling you, like, I was listening to Astra Taylor lately, and she also is really inspired by Gatto, and you know, her whole thing is like, I was my own teacher. But she inevitably went to school and like then went to Brown, and I think she's like somehow, even though her parents were like her dad was a doctor, her mom was an artist. And so she and her siblings were kind of literally just kind of left to be their own like teachers, and like they get supplies for them if they wanted to make a newsletter, which they did. And she made a lot of plays. This was though before the time of internet. So can you leave kids up to their own devices with devices? Like,
No.
these, like,
No. You can't.
to go to versus like if it's not there and you're like, well, cool, I got this device, it's got Paint Shop, let me see what I can do, right? But now you've got Paint Shop and you've got Chrome or whatever browser.
Candy Crush, yeah.
She talks a lot about trust. Well, she doesn't. I just thought a lot about trust from her talk that she gave 12 years ago, and it just made me think. Is there a new radical how do you have trust in yourself and kids when you don't have inherent limits to things? I think it's like we're being challenged to like up our game on trust, but trust is such a hard thing for us to do as humans. Like even to trust your own self. And should you always trust yourself? Sometimes you should be self-skeptical.
Right.
So
Right.
anyways, that's all I wanted to just contribute really quick. But love the conversation. I think it's really important, and I appreciate when people can get into like the nuts and bolts and the nitty gritty of it, because a lot of people are just trying to, get by or just do what you normally just have to do to maintain a life at home, and like to do the alternatives and to do the unique experiences. I think it has to be more of a mode, because like you can always think, well, I could do this better, I could do that better, I could be providing more. But yeah, if we get down to the heart of like questioning school itself, then we get into like Scole, we get into disposition, we get into like orientation toward life itself and learning and orientation towards our own selves and those around us. So I think if we can get back to that, you get less in the paranoia of, am I doing enough? Which is still a kind of, performance. I mean, there's necessary performance we're going to do as humans, we need to do as humans. But you know what I mean? It's like that's such a performance mindset that instead of thinking about it in terms of like the performance of an art, of like
Right.
it's time, it's like it's showtime, in a good way. So, anyways.
Yeah, and we're the performance for an artist. I mean, any field, there's a sort of like role that people know about that you can kind of take on and play with and come up with your own version of, right? Versus the other kind of performance that we were talking about, the need for recognition within the schooling system, a kind of performance that's for authority that can't be intrinsically motivated outside of the potential recognition of a certain kind of authority figure, And I think part of what we were getting at, maybe before you showed up even, was just like, so yeah, how does education, or how can cultivation of humans, the Bildung, generate that sense of self-motivation to get to the bottom of things and to figure it out for oneself, to impress your own self. And it's sort of like to impress, instead of it being like, look what I did. At some point, the kid who will, of course, most kids will want to show you, but also like how to naturalize or normalize a sort of habitus that finds that inner satisfaction from just doing it for oneself. Maybe there's still that potential recognition eventually, but it's not the immediate point all the time, which right now is commodified in the schooling system. It's standardized, and teachers go, oh, that's very good. You did good. In the same way that the busy parent says, nice drawing of an elephant. Well, what are you talking? And it's just like, because like people want the instantaneous, look, I did something, and oh, confirmation, yes, you did. There's got to be like the lag between the thing that was done and the person who sees that the thing was done, right? Nobody, nod your heads if you can all hear that baby too much. It's not really, no, we have great sound canceling software. Like they can't even hear. They can't even hear it. He's warming up for he's got stuff to say. He's got stuff to say. He's gonna get to. But all right, she's gonna go check on the kiddos. Okay, we'll come back to mediation then. Yeah. Oh, on mediation, I do, if we have time, want to come back to not saying participation.
Yeah.
I kind of want to leave behind the Levy-Bruhl signification of that word forever by replacing it with a compound sentence that I think we have to do, like we did with the post-class fractured mass, because it's like, we shouldn't have to explain in a Baudrillardian sense every time we say mass. Yeah. And therefore we say PCFM. And then of course it becomes a technical concept that we've elaborated on because we, unlike him, do not leave out the schooling system in the PMC. Which brings me back, and we'll come back to participation and the technical term I want to use instead later, and why that's important. But first I want to focus in on the thread that I left unwoven there when I was like, I know I'm forgetting something. Galen, if you did find that quote, the one from the Carnegie Institute, it's like the only big quote in chapter 1, where it's like a full-on, you can see it's an actual quote. But the thread is the working class. And I was talking about the PMC, and then I think I got derailed by more exciting things in the moment, like discovering that Postman wrote on this subject and was thinking about schooling as a medium. But the real point here with the Ehrenreichs and Burnham and bringing in the PMC is that, yeah, when we're talking about the fundamental material changes in the 20th century that makes it so that you can't just do Marxism without it necessarily turning into either right or left fascism, is that, yeah, we have to tarry with the negative of the schooling situation and how it selects for a certain kind of person to manage and reproduce the relations of production. Something that we've used a shorthand for, we just say the PMC, shout out to Ehrenreich. But I was doing all this stuff about the libertarians and the right-wingers and their critique of schooling, and we brought in the wonderful thing that Matthew added to that about how they don't go far enough. But Gatto, what makes him so special is that he does frame the whole thing as this is an attack on the working class. The working class, for the entirety of its struggle with industrialization, it always had the demand for universal school. Progressives only come around with Woodrow Wilson. They only come around with W.E.B. Du Bois. They only come around with Frederick Winslow Taylor and Edward Bernays. And so these guys are selling themselves to capital as a particular function that is cheaper. It's going to be expensive, but it's cheaper than calling in the Pinkertons and having them shoot people and break people's legs and use terror. Because when you use terror to break the strike, it encourages the rebellion in the same way that Foucault's going to talk about here with discipline and punish. So the big move is to get out ahead of the strike, to replace the advanced workers with the diploma havers. And so, welcome, you can sit in back there if you want to, but, or yeah. Hey, look at that, everyone. It's a little one. It's a runner. So anyway, we're talking here about getting out ahead of and undermining working class collaboration, or kind of the push for a union or a movement that would actually do something across the working class divides that have been erected. And those divides being erected is something Marxists today will refer to. They use identity politics to talk about it. They use consumer niche identities. They'll talk about these things in their own ways. If we do get to attend Platypus here at the beginning of April, hopefully, we'll be surrounded by people who are very well aware that the working class is divided. But they always use ideology. They always act like it's ideology that is dividing people. No, that's idealism, guys. So Marxists are the most idealists because they don't focus in on none of the ones that we know. None of them ever emphasize the schooling system put forward by progressives. But Woodrow Wilson's, and this I said earlier, point about the need for the maintenance of the schooling system, the schooling system maintaining these two classes, one much larger that will not have poets, will not have, and that's where I got into the whole thing about, the different kinds of potential that can be suffocated, stifled, and how that can really hurt us at the level of our soul, our heart, our mind. Well, and that demoralizes us and makes life miserable. Well, to bring it all back around here, the Carnegie Institute and the Rockefeller Institute were the two most powerful organs for advancing what became mass public progressive schooling. And they did it for good reasons, with good intentions, because when they looked at the working class movements and populism, they saw something that was reactive. They saw something that was anti-them, of course, as billionaires or whatever. I mean, at the time, they were the most powerful, richest people in the history of the world. And I like to argue that they could, at that time, do more than a Musk kind of figure can do now, right? Because now there's 1,000 billionaires. When there's 1,000 billionaires and you're a billionaire, it's like, well, you might be a big shot billionaire, but there's 1,000 billionaires. Back then, there were not so many. Yeah, it's 5. So the Rockefellers and the Carnegies. Hey, bud, don't distract from the production, or you'll have to leave. I'm sorry, but the you just focus on us and get in on it, bro. he's not going to be able to, but we're talking about from 1905 until 1935, 30 years of the most wealthy people in the history of the world funding a new, ostensibly radical kind of schooling system, but doing it for explicitly anti-working class reasons. Now, because they thought that they knew what's best for the workers, which is know your place. And stop striking. You're really messing things up for us. And so they're not doing it as bad guys. They think they do know what's best. And in some cases, I think they did. So I'm not going to be so anti-Fordist that I say Lenin is bad because he adopts Ford. No, they just don't go far enough. Neither Ford nor Lenin goes far enough on this thing. And so the wonderful quote there from the Carnegie Institute, where you were able to find it, Galen will now read it.
So I think it's actually the Rockefeller General Education Board, but it's from a 1906 document called Occasional Letter Number 1. The quote is, "In our dreams, people yield themselves with perfect docility to our molding hands. The present educational conventions of intellectual and moral education fade from our minds, and unhampered by tradition, we work our own goodwill upon the grateful and responsive folk. We shall not try to make these people or any of their children into philosophers or men of learning or men of science. We have not to raise up from among them authors, educators, poets, or men of letters. We shall not search for embryo great artists, painters, musicians, nor lawyers, doctors, preachers, politicians, statesmen, of whom we have an ample supply. The task we set before ourselves is very simple. We will organize children and teach them to do in a perfect way the things their fathers and mothers are doing in an imperfect way."
Oh my goodness.
Stay in your lane.
Stay in your lane. When they come out and just say the quiet part out loud, it's amazing because back then they talked, it's like to talk about what they were self-aware explicitly and publicly doing now, people call you a conspiracy theorist. They say, oh, don't act like it's intentional. And it's like, well, but it was intentional. And then of course people will go, well, but there's lots of good teachers doing what they do now. And it's like, well, why do I have to explain this to you? You already know how ACAB works, right? The point is not that there are good or bad. No, the system was erected to have certain kinds of functional effects. And the people who hold positions in that space, they don't know what they're doing because they're not the architects. But I love how Gatto in that, I think probably in the prologue or chapter 1, goes back to Spinoza and Fichte as examples of how people were great geniuses who were doing speculative political and social sort of theorizing, were advancing ideas about like how if you really wanted to control large masses of people, here's how you would do it. And then it's literally the thing that the progressives say, hey, capital, we can do it for you. And now you have all these progressives and leftists who are like, no. All we need is more money for schooling. And it's just like, okay, well, you guys can gaslight us all you want, but it was intentional. And now people are functionaries within that system, and they can either become self-aware and reflexive about that, own up to it, and then do something about it, or for all practical terms, to me, you might be a well-meaning abuser. A well-meaning abuser. And I have a lot of them in my life. There's a lot of well-meaning abusers. I'm not saying we should go around and call them that or treat them like that or work with them like that. I mean, the fact is like teachers and cops, which is also to say Democrats and Republicans respectively. But teachers and cops do what they do because they feel called to do it, because that is a genuine occupation for human beings, and it always has been, though the institution as it currently exists is historically contingent, and there are reasons why it has these sort of systemic or structural effects. Okay, so that's the end of everything that I wanted to say. I want to hand you guys this microphone since yours died, I have mine charging, or yours charging now, and then I'll just hand you mine. But then I want to get some hands going. If any of you, Federico, welcome. Good to see you, man. Luke, great. Galen, Rebecca, Woo, Matthew. Now, especially those of you who haven't said anything yet, Nicholas. If this has stirred something up for you as a schooled subject, or as a non-schooled subject, or as a unschooling yourself or deschooling yourself kind of subject, if it stirred something up for you, if it makes sense of something that you didn't know about before, or if you have a meta note on retroversion, or if you have anything that this has really stirred up for you, just please raise your hand, because I'll definitely want to loop you in here in a sec. But we're gonna go over here to the I don't know what we should call this. The peanut gallery. Yeah, here we go. Yeah.
That's it.
And I recently said F the peanut gallery on Substack. I like that you pointed out the two different types of short buses. I was also in the gifted and talented program when I was young, but when I reached high school, where that really intensifies and really kind of clicks into place, things became far less stable for me, and I actually wasn't in high school. But I rode my own little short bus off to the high school when I was in, elementary school, first, second, third grade, and worked with this high school kid and did all this cool stuff, and did competitions, and they were like, "Nance, you're the smartest kid ever born." It's not what they said, but
That's what they meant.
but it's what they meant. But I was separated, and I was ostracized implicitly by my fellow elementary school kids, and I was made to feel like I was handicapped, for lack of a better term. I wanted to say the real word here, but I'm working on not saying that word as often as I do. But it really was this othering. And it really, I didn't know it at the time, but upon reflection as an older man, retroversion, I really realized what it was doing, and it was trying to categorize me, and it was trying to get me to kind of internalize this modality of moving through the social scene and the fields of which I was a part. And so maybe I'm lucky that things happen the way they did. Maybe I'm not. I guess that's that, but that's not the question. But it is true, and I like Anne's recounting of it, and I do hope Anne goes on to speak and write more about it, because I think we can all see the kind of otherizing and the we don't want to be ableist, and we all really empathize with those who are less able than us, especially cognitively. There is a sadness in someone who just cognitively, and that's real, but there's also a sadness in the person they think they're being built up and they think they're being enabled, but what they're really being is stultified by this system that convinces them that they are destined for great things, when in reality, you're destined to become a functionary in this broken system that plays on your care and your empathy and your kindness and forces you to keep children doing perfectly what their parents have been doing imperfectly. We all care about learning. We all care about education. We are all aware of the fact that we need to be cultivated. And it is this kind of structural, mechanized, mathematized system that actually diminishes the potential that lies at the heart of every young person. So caring educators the world around shouldn't be fighting, oh, is it institutions? Oh, is it homeschooling? Is it Montessori? Is it, we should be remembering, we all have a potential.
I think it's well put. So a few things on what you're saying on the giftedness. First, you're led to believe that if you're gifted, you're pulled out from people. Mm-hmm. So then gifted serving the working class is subconsciously and indirectly associated to you not going to occur, because you're supposed to be pulled away from. Also, if you're gifted, you will be continually pulled on to the next thing, or into an inner circle, a greater and greater inner circle, right? And what ends up happening is that gives you a certain confirmation that you are gifted.
and you become afraid if you get off the track that leads you that way. Also, it suggests that there's a right path and a wrong path, and if you're not on the right path, you're doomed.
Yeah.
You could get, because there's a subconscious, the track system. The suggestion is that if you get an A on the wrong path, it won't get you anywhere. You have to get an A on the right path, right? And so there's a right path, and you have to do well on the right path. And the right path will open up doors because someone will acknowledge that you're on the right path and thus give you opportunity, right? Well, that right there has a separation that occurs, a classification, a sort of moving you away from people. And also to the people left behind, the indirect lesson is that's not for me. What those people do is not for me. So if they do intellectual work, that's not for me. Because another indirect, in my opinion, source of class division is actually if, say, working class people say philosophy is not for me.
Yep.
You know, if they say, oh, well, that's too intellectual for me. That happens all the time. Where that is a certain training where you are actually taught, no, higher academics is not for you, right? Because I was on this track and you're on that track, so it's not for me. So then your enclosure is self-imposed in different things, right? Whereas, and then, of course, there's a indirect association that you're only being educated if there's some sort of trajectory that is clearly quantifiable that you can see yourself on, right? If you're, you read Hegel or you've read, these thinkers and you've had these conversations, but did you, after having that conversation, get pulled onto a different track and pulled along? And you say no. They're like, oh, well, then it must not have been smart. Then it was actually a stupid use of time. It was really dumb to read Hegel. That's what's very interesting. There's a reversal that you'll start noticing as you get older, where actually it's kind of seen as dumb to continue doing lifelong learning or reading or different things unless you're getting a grade. Isn't it interesting that learning actually at a certain point becomes silly to do, right? Unless it is, and how is that even conceivable as a notion? Unless it's because we actually associate learning with a quantifiable progress, right? And so there's a certain acknowledgement that has to occur. There's a number of things that come to mind. Dave was making the point that there is this certain learning that occurs between this encounter of subject and the world that gives rise to this possibility of self-motivation. We were talking last night on this idea of, sometimes I'll talk about intrinsic motivation, although by that I don't have in mind this interior-external division that occur. Intrinsic, I almost sometimes in my mind think about the ability to have an intrinsic capacity that can see something as being a good in of itself, right? So it just depends on what you mean by the term, but self-motivation, et cetera, so forth. Very often when we ask the question, is somebody self-motivated? I've actually never met a human being that's self-motivated about absolutely nothing. It's just that a lot of the things that people are self-motivated about, we don't quantify as valuable, right? Like a lot of people are self-motivated to learn sports statistics. A lot of people are self-motivated to learn stuff about track. They're self-motivated about different things. So for me, when the question becomes almost anthropological, is self-motivation exclusive? I don't think as a general category, not at all. I've never met a non-self-motivated person. It's just that if you ask, well, are people self-motivated about a particular thing? Well, then it radically drops, right? Like Nassim Taleb makes an example, maybe in Fooled by Randomness, where a lot of people are amazed when they're in like New York City and they run into somebody they know. And they go, what are the chances? Well, actually, the chances of running into somebody you know in New York City is not that low. But meeting a particular person in New York City is very low, right? So if you're asking what is the probability that people will be self-motivated to do, say, mathematics, that a given person would be self-motivated to do mathematics, probably quite low. But the probability that a person would be self-motivated about something is actually quite high, actually. The question is, does the classroom facilitate the realization of that self-motivation and then the further cultivation of it, right? And actually, what's kind of interesting is if people are actually naturally self-motivated about different things, that actually emergently helps you take care of the fact of having everyone do everything without having to engineer it top down, right? And then actually, what's also funny about that is I do think it would be another subject there is something about self-motivation that has a kind of natural, I won't take this too far, it has a natural way of having people consume in a sustainable manner. Because if I'm self-motivated, then what I'm, say, for example, you could have, then I tend to buy what I need and stop buying goods once I have the space to do the intrinsic motivation, and not buy anymore, right? Because there's something about consumption, and intrinsic motivation has a natural binding principle to consumption. And I would actually say that our capitalism, where that's auto-cannibalistic and eating itself to death, is a product of what happens to an economy that doesn't have intrinsic motivation, because you have no way to bind the intrinsic motivation other than totalitarianism. You'd have to use or guilt, like the environmental movement or something like that, right? So there's something about intrinsic motivation that naturally gives you division in a way that people are happy about, right? You get, because there's a question of, is division inherently bad, right? It depends on what we mean. There is division in an orchestra. There are different sections and there are different instruments, but actually that division makes possible Beethoven's Ninth, right? Now, I don't want to over-romanticize it, but there's an idea that there is, if you can create spaces that incubate this intrinsic motivation in people, then you actually have natural balancings of consumption that occur. I mean, the other thing, I guess I also and that can lead to like something like Beethoven's Ninth. Like another example that I think about with Paul Virilio on this kind of acceleration or self to death. Intrinsic motivation can help you determine at what point you need, how fast do you need the technology to go will be tied to as fast you need to do for your intrinsic motivation. And then you stop there. You don't need it to go any faster. You don't need it to be any wider, right? So you also have a binding principle for the extent of technology without which it just pulls you along to an infinite point, right? So there's also an issue where intrinsic motivation is let me put it this way. Intrinsic motivation is the only way to bind otherwise cancerous phenomenon that is alternative to power totalitarian. And when I say cancerous, I mean something that naturally grows, because cancer is a growth that doesn't stop, right? And so technology, like many of these things, are cancerous unless they are bound, right? Well, how do you bind it without it being power? Or force in a bad way? Well, you need an intrinsic, because that becomes your mean, your Aristotelian, your intrinsic motivation becomes your mean of discernment, right? And that's like when I look at Bildung education, which I think of the Nordic structure that you see, Lena Anderson is very good on that. Like you see an education, well, I guess there's a few things because this is such an important topic where you're talking about Marxism that is not taking education seriously. Like basically, if there's an understanding of someone like Lukács where the proletariat has to kind of dissolve the category of proletariat, and there has to be a certain dissolving of that category of thinking. Well, then you are talking about something fundamentally, in essence, educational, right? An ability to not think within category and yet still function, right? The ability to be able to see, okay, this category is there, but it no longer applies, but I'm not overly attached to it, so I can't function. So there's some sort of move that has to occur there, right? Then you have to take seriously, but here's also, this is a key to Postman's analysis. He said, if we see problems in education, we think the problem is the content of education. He's like, no, it's the medium of education. You can teach good content in a bad medium and it won't work, right? You have to change the medium and the structure itself, right? And so like stuff like this, right? The other thinker, I guess I would also note, I was also thinking about Austin Farrer. He was a theologian, but he had some of his thinking, I think, is very relevant for education reform. And what he talks about, Austin Farrer, Austin, and then Farrer, Farrer. And the idea that I get from Mr. Farrer is the notion that education is under a regime of verification, where what is you are educated to verify something. Right? And often it's to verify your class or your standing or your future. I must have, like, we want to verify what kids have a good future, right? And that, of course, is all in the realm of planning. Like, we want to create plans can be verified because they create a standard of verification. And that then allows us to kind of determine also right answers. We can verify right answers. So then what ends up happening is you only are going to be educated in that which can ultimately give you a verifiable result, right? Which means there must be a big other or different things. And like an interesting point, I bring him up because Mr. Farrow is bringing our attention to the fact that we actually think that, oh, well, all of that what we're describing is just elementary, high school. Once you get to PhD programs in college, it improves in different things, right?
No.
And it does not. And you know, Mr. Farrow kind of has this quote where he says basically, when Aquinas is writing the Gentilius, Summa Gentilius, and Theologica, or when Aristotle or Plato was writing, do you think they're sitting around going, I can't wait till people write dissertations on this? You know, I just can't wait for it, right? He says what ends up happening when you get someone like, I'll just use Aquinas because that's the example he uses. When you get an Aquinas that is writing the Summa Theologica, the genius is in the fingertips, is the phrase. There is something that is pulling them along, that they are trying to realize that they don't know where they're going, right? There is this something that is surprising them, that is pulling them, right? And it's the opposite. Like Schopenhauer has that lovely example where he says, today in education, we come upon a ladder and we think the point is to pull off the rungs and put them in a bag to show to people, right? And that's the trivia mindset and different things. When really, when you see a ladder, you climb it, right? Because you see something there. The reason I say all of this is because you were saying something very important about this certain experience of surprising yourself. Like you suddenly find a certain recognition. It's like, oh, I recognize an idea, and like instead of the recognition between, there's almost a recognition that you contain some sort of space that can surprise you in what can come out of it, right? Now that is I like to talk about Lovecraft with the craft in parentheses.
You mean like last night when I said like the Levinasian thing about discovering
the infinity, and you were also talking about this sort of the recognition, because I think it ties to the question of recognition. So yes, with the infinity, and basically, education. The education is to bring you to the place where you actually realize you contain this possibility of surprising yourself, and to fall in love with that surprising of yourself. Actually, because how cool is this that things can come out of me I've never thought before? That when we talk, the conversation ends up there, and you need to base recognition in this surprising of yourself, not a certain I'm entitled to recognition because I have human dignity or things like that. It's like, well, because you're a human being, you can actually function as a kind of clearing in the right conditions where things can come out that surprise you. And Austin Farrow is basically suggesting that education is the closing off of clearing at this point. It's about verifying your thinking to do something verifiable. Well, that can't be surprising by definition. It has to be that of which someone can verify. I can't verify a new idea because there hasn't been a consensus around it, right? So I'm actually then indirectly taught to be suspicious of anything that comes out that surprises me or that's new. Like, and there's a lot of talk of the hermeneutic of suspicions with Paul Ricoeur and different things. Well, we actually do that to ourselves. It's not just a suspicion of reading books and to kind of be suspicious of them and to tear them down. We actually become suspicious of anything that, like a new thought. We actually become suspicious of a new thought. And once you do that, this is the point. There is no possibility of intrinsic motivation. Because intrinsic motivation is precisely based on the excitement of something coming out of you that surprises you and that you find exhilarating, that you want to then pursue, right? So this is the opposite of trivia. This is the opposite of verification. This is the opposite of planning in favor of preparation. And
which word is the opposite of all these things?
That this intrinsic motivation, this kind of thing that surprises you, that comes out. Because the other thing is, once you start learning that you can have relationships where stuff comes out of you you've never thought about, that then you can go work on and bring back to the cipher and different things, that naturally balances. That also naturally balances consumption. That naturally helps have a standard for buying and spending and what technology to get and what technology not, et cetera, so forth. Without this intrinsic motivation, the only way to have a standard of judgment has to be externalized to something beyond you. Like what other people are doing, or what's the best tech, or how do I get a little faster, quantifiable metrics. So then you're going to be pulled along. You're going to be accelerated to death. You're going to have an unbound cancer that will ultimately lead to an autocannibalism. But once you have this internal mechanism of sort of drive, that becomes the standard. Because we've been talking a lot, and then I'll stop. We've been talking a lot about the human is found in the place of discernment, where you make a live decision in a certain openness, I was also saying, y'all should have seen, a lot of times you have a barn raising in Amish to have like a festival. We had a freaking roof raising where the roof of the barn flipped over yesterday because of the wind. It was grand right before they arrived. It was really something. But that's been fun. But we've been talking a lot about the human is found in this place of discernment and making a decision, right? But then the question becomes, what is the standard of the decision, of the discernment, right? If you don't cultivate this inner space and this inner surprise, you have no standard by which to make those internal judgments, and therefore the human cannot be saved. The human cannot be saved. And you see, ultimately, this question of the cultivation of this intrinsic motivation also critically cannot be a content question. Because I can't give you content and you be intrinsically motivated. I can create a space that incubates it. It's incubated by a medium condition. It's incubated by an architecture, and it's incubated by a situation. And that's how you do it. And so therefore, you can if as long as the medium of the classroom is the same, you could take this entire conversation. If you put it in a classroom and had a test about it and who knows the right answer, oh right, trivia, intrinsic motivation, that's the right answer. If it is in the form of trivia, then it could be the content, and it will not cultivate the thing that the content is about. And that is where I think many conservatives, like all what you're saying is where conservatives and liberals actually, either way, just contribute to the problem in different ways, is because they're just trying to, they're having a debate about the content, not the medium. And the content is not the problem. It's the medium which incubates the habits.
Or they're just arguing about where the funding comes from.
Yes, that's correct. And so ultimately too, whenever you have these kind of going back and forths and it doesn't go anywhere, or you have these trade-offs or all these things we've been talking about, the address is a design. The address is a space, because space is geometry. If you're stuck in a back and forth, algebraically, as I like to put it, then the only way to deal is to add another dimension, which is going to be a vertical, which is going to be a geometry. It's going to be a space. It's going to be an architecture. So we have to think space. And unfortunately, intellectuals have not contributed to this design thinking because they often win the game or get the status of the current medium, right? So you're not going to be thinking about, and also too, they are seen as the ones who are the best at planning, of knowing what's going to happen. We associate intellectuals as those who can predict. Well, guess what prediction is? That's a mechanic, cybernetic term. And therefore, an intellectual is someone who knows the future versus prepared for the unexpected. So then we incentivize thinking with knowing the future. And what is it? You get on a track in high school to know your future. You will have a middle-class life. You can predict what is going to occur. Well, prediction is the opposite of intrinsic motivation. You just follow the track, right? So prediction, planning, all of these are the opposites. And until you cultivate that space of you becoming, enjoying that surprising of yourself in any circumstance, then you are simply going to be at service of a track that your humanity is outsourced to. So I think it's just an extremely important topic, and I do think it has to start in education. So some thoughts.
Thanks, Daniel and Nance. And by the way, shout out to Michelle, who's now listening from the kitchen as she cleans, which is our favorite thing. We love multitaskers, of course, workers with earbuds, main people here. But it says that her name is Dave at Theory Underground. So just so you all know, that's not true. That's a lie. Her name is not Dave. But I said to the three people in the queue here, they're going to go next. And I want to say, Cesar, what's up? We're gonna see you in Phoenix pretty soon, hombre. I hope we'll see you in Phoenix pretty soon. But okay, before I do that though, I wanted to say it's the order is Nicholas, Federico, and then it's gonna be Wu. But if one of you raised your hand 20 minutes ago and now you're like, but I gotta go in 5 minutes, just say so right now in the chat, and then I'll put you in out of order, because chances are everyone else has the time. And I think the wavelength should always prioritize the moment and the people who have the time for the moment. But at the point that someone has been sharing the moment for an hour, that person if they've really got to bounce, they should always be able to get their little thing in before they go, because they can always listen to the rest of it later. This will be premiering on the channel today or tomorrow. I'm not really sure, but we are going to make this installment public. They're usually not public. A lot of the lectures in this series are not public. Please, for the love of God, everybody, do not let me forget to say some things about Molly Ann Rothenberg. That's my only big hanging thing here, because I said this is not my concept and this is not a TU concept. It's just become a core concept at TU. And it's become a core concept because of the crisis in education and the fact that it is such a problem for people getting involved here at TU. And so, yes, all of you three who are going to go, I'm really excited to hear about what you're all going to say, but we're not going to do this thing where you say something, Nicholas, and then we all respond to it, and then Federico says something, and then we all respond to it, and then woo. I don't understand why Zoom calls fall into that weird arrangement where it's like this assumption that it's you say it, then we say it, then you say it, then we say it. No, you're all three going to go in order. So it's going to go Nicholas, Federico, and woo. Cesar said, yo, busy at work, but hoping to get some subliminal inspiration. I think you're going to love this one. It should go up on the channel pretty soon. It'll be available in its totality, which is a lie because there's no totalizing this one. But, all right. Yeah, let's go, Nicholas.
Cool. Hey y'all, been nice to listen so far. I might change the way you were using space slightly and be like, wow, listening to y'all talk and just the space has grown of like the things I can go on in right now. So I have my notes. I'm going to take a moment to feel, okay, I have a starting point. I really like the distinction between the content versus the medium, and how the medium, like, yeah, you put this conversation in the medium of the classroom, transforms fundamentally the potential of the content, transformed how it's received and how it's participated with. The distinction that brought me to, that's like, that I use a lot is, for me, content is the thing, and the medium is the process way. I might tie that in. Self-motivation. Okay. I feel like that might be the biggest one for me of the things said. We'll see if I have that much to say about it right now. Listening to Nance, I was also in the talented and gifted category. My school didn't make much of it. It just felt like I was brought outside the classroom every now and then to teach math to other kids, which was weird. High school for me was too easy, which meant that because I liked being smart and because I wanted the recognition of like my authorities, I actually was baller. I actually like pushed myself. I actually like learned so much. I tried to take the hardest classes and I tried to get the best grades I could in them. And I could finish my homework and have time to do shit that I wanted to do. I had a lot of motivation. And then some days I wouldn't, but like I was always ahead. I went to, you've mentioned this once. I went to Reed College. Reed College is pretty hard. Funnily enough, I feel like the moment I realized I was not very smart and that there was a bunch of kids around me who like got to take complex like learn about like what's the complex analysis in high school, and like these all, like the moment I realized like, oh, I'm pretty stupid, like in terms of like I didn't get to wow, something about the very nature and how maybe how I might be misusing it, but like something about my habitus, maybe just the nature of how I was like gonna navigate that medium fundamentally changed, and I just kind of started getting chipped away at like what is knowledge for, and I pivoted to like a different way of relating to the content. For me, it was like became more about authenticity, and I moved from science to literature. We'll see what I have to say about that. But to tie back into intrinsic motivation, so there was something about recognition, and from one form of recognition, I pivoted to another's, from that of my like teachers to that of my peers. Like I'm an authentic person. I want relationships. I want these things. It was kind of funny to go from like the class, like like I'm the smarty in high school to like I'm kind of a little bit more of like the burnout in college. So like change of identity in those ways too. But in high school, I had so much goddamn self-motivation. And in college, I really wanted to manifest it. There is something beneath the seams of all these social forms and all these forms of, there are these capitals, but there's also, I just wanted like to bring in, there's something about awe, like at least for me, with certain types of knowledge, there was something about awe, and that mattered to me. And to have that feel stifled by the learning environment and the classroom environment, to feel like my body knows what awe feels like, but somehow everything I'm learning is just not producing that experience in me over and over again. That was really hard for me. I feel like I was only able to produce that, like listening to really great people talk, like watching, like I feel like I got more awe from watching movies than I did being in the classroom. And that was really sad. Or from reading like a really good novel, like To the Lighthouse, which is why I switched to literature. And and then I think I'll wind out to like a last point that maybe will give something to say about what to me a future of education might demand, might need of us. I want to say that with everything I said, with recognition and with the idea of self-motivation, with like I want to say that there's an embodied, like organismic, sometimes just raw behavioral level of like certain needs. And that our relationship to knowledge, when it does not carry forward our needs, is just not how we'll then navigate it. Like we need to, like our knowledge, like what appeals to us knowledge-wise, like it's no secret. We all know if you look at a philosopher, you see how something about their personality, like in something about their circumstances, engenders the types of things that appeal to them. I'm speaking to that from the other place. I'm saying like we seek to carry forward ourselves through what we learn. We seek to carry forward ourselves through navigating the field of institutions and things. Like there is something about us. And so when we talk about school and when we start talking about less the elite education, but like the masses of education, we come in with really hard life circumstances, like, and that can't find a way into the classroom, I think stifles the potential. Because if I can't somehow relate my knowledge to what's hard in my life, or use knowledge to like feel empowered in this other way in my life, then fuck my motivation. Fuck my motive. Where is that going to come from? So I'll leave it there, because that feels like the most important point for me. Yeah.
Hi. Can you hear me? Yes. So I'm not sure how related this is to the conversation because I joined a little bit late, but I saw you were talking about natural tendencies and, of course, the education system. And I was thinking that a lot of my friends cannot wait to be diagnosed with something. A lot of my friends, so especially in university, but also at work, they want to be diagnosed with a pathology, etc. And I really don't understand why they're looking for this diagnosis. And one of the reasons I thought why this could happen is because in university, in school, you're considered a unit in some sense. You're not fully seen as a person, and maybe your natural tendencies are not recognized, and therefore the only way, in some sense, to for your natural tendencies to be recognized is to deem them somewhat unnatural, to pathologize them. And yeah, I don't know. I was thinking about that.
Mr.
If
Wukas.
Federico, should I go? Yeah, hi guys. Nance, Daniel, Dave, Federico, you're all beautiful. I just wanted to add maybe referring back to the schooling, to the schooling ourselves, because looking back at because I didn't just go to a normal school, I also went to a music school simultaneously when I was 6, and I finished when I was 15. And there is something with music which really makes you see, makes me see after all these years what Gato is talking about. Because with other subjects, with mathematics, like science, biology, it is abstract when you encounter it, when they start teaching it to you. And you really don't know, you really can feel it immediately that something is wrong. But with music, music implies a lot of creativity, improvisation, like really feeling it, like going and experiencing it even viscerally, like at the level of the body, dancing around. And nothing like that happens. At least it didn't happen in my music school. And kids who were really into music, I wasn't, but kids who were really into music, they either dropped out quite fast after finishing primary school, or they were captured and went into competitions. And it made me think about Aristotle, because I was reading for Benjamin's course Nicomachean Ethics and Politics, and it was really inspiring to me that Aristotle talks about how the free person, like the citizen, if he is virtuous in some craft techna, he does it for virtue. But if he goes too hard for something, some one craft, then he can become vulgar. And he literally says that if you start going at it in order to compete, like go for competitions, then you are slavish, like in the sense of you are not doing it in order to become virtuous, to like discover your potential. You are simply going at it for recognition or money or something. And it's really, this makes me, I want to continue with Aristotle, because he mentions, when he analyzes, he wants to justify slavery, he comes up with the category of the natural slave. And the way I understood it is, this is the person who can't set his own goals. He doesn't have reason in the proper way, so he can't make his own, he can decide on what he should do. So if you set him free, then he won't be happy, he will actually suffer. So it's like moral to enslave him. And we can think about that whatever we want, but looking back at the educational system and even at my studies, when I finished studies last year and my master's, I really went into this mode of, I felt that I was made into a natural slave. Because even if you are studying something like philosophy, where even if you want to study it and you feel that this is your thing, they give you goals. Like they will tell you what to do. After finishing it, it really hits you hard. Like it hit me so hard that because you don't notice it. You never notice it if you have even some little thing, like something set in front of you. But when everything drops out, then it's either complete existential anxiety or you get captured into something else. And it's really powerfully evident to me, like it was evident and is for the last few months, that I was made into a natural slave. And it's probably going to take a lifetime of work to get back to being, like, to become a self-governed citizen. So, yeah, thanks.
See how fast that was, just to let everyone talk instead of doing this constant, like, oh, we have to respond to everyone who said anything. It's like now the three of us can respond to any one of those things if we so desire. And there's a couple of things I still kind of want to hit on from my threads I was playing with earlier. But immediately I want to springboard off of something Wu just brought up. And also just shout out the fact that Will is in the house. You can all see him sitting there with his sunglasses on, real cool in Daniel Garner's most hillbilly invention of them all. The easy chair on wheels. It's the coolest thing ever, guys. It's like the easy office chair. Yeah. This is like, imagine if like a couch potato was a job in an office space. Yeah. This is like one step away from the by and large ship in WALL-E, like. It's the last vehicle right here. This is Virilio has a whole essay about this. It's called The Last Vehicle, 100%. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, best real wheel recliner ever. Yeah. No, I want one, man. I want one. I want it to be motorized too. I don't know why golf carts don't have easy chairs on them. Like I want to be able to kick back and golf cart around. Come on. But I was gonna follow up on something about the incentive structure and something that Wu just brought up, and then I got off on this chair thing, and then I'm like, okay, maybe I don't remember what I was about to say. Oh man, it was so good. It would have been such a perfect tie-in, but I will remember it in a second. And so yeah, what do you? But also you as a participant, you can also come in on this at any point you want to here. But I wanted to definitely say that socioanalysis, something that we care about a lot here at Theory Underground. It's psychoanalysis, but based in field and habitus theory. So that is to say, socioanalysis does not just say the unconscious functions like a language. Now we are going to proceed to, talk about, no. Instead of bracketing out the relations and mode of production in the clinic and dealing with that subject on the couch, we are going to almost do the opposite, bracket out that subject and instead say anyone in X, Y, or Z positions in any given field has to have A, B, or C dispositions in order to not get chewed up and spat out by that position and or field. And so what kinds of dispositions gravitate towards certain kinds of positions? What is it about the symbolic capital at stake in a given field that attracts or repels certain kinds of dispositions, right? And so when I said Democrats and Republicans, no, I just put it backwards. When I said teachers or cops, and then I said Democrats or Republicans respectively, I mean it. It's not a coincidence, guys, that the ideological and repressive apparatuses and the two parties that back one versus the other align the way that they do politically. Like there are people who are dispositionally more like the kinds of person who goes into a public school and feels called to teach, and it's more of a nurturant and you could say feminine kind of thing. And of course, women are overrepresented in teaching. And the exact same thing can be said about cops. And then of course, the exceptions only prove the rule. And duh, right? But what has sociology in America been able to do with that insight? Nothing. I don't know. I'm not sure. I've not read enough. But my sense is that nope, teachers are good. We need more of them. Cops are bad. We need less of them. It's like this sort of disavowal of the idea that the repressive and ideological apparatuses are built to rely on each other. And they both do something for the other. And of course, there is the micro version of the other in the same, meaning that the police have their educational department. There are workshops, like they do teaching in the same way that juvenile detention is only one step away from the principal's office. And you go to timeout, you're reprimanded by the teachers. Well, enough times you're going to go to juvie. And so socioanalysis, though, for Bourdieu, it's very important that we become self-aware of how we come along and we say, well, yeah, sure, my colleagues think this, but I think that, and I'm the exception that proves the rule. None of this other stuff applies to me. I'm not a cop. I'm not a teacher in like this normal sense. I'm called to this work, and I do this special thing, and I do it against the tendencies of this institution, and that's all good, and that's all great. But the point is for us as philosophers, or as social theorists, or as people who want to clear the real grounds of intelligibility and possibility for actually pursuing that calling via the occupation, freeing the occupation from its instrumentalization and co-option to free that calling into your service, right? Like, well, to do that requires socioanalysis, which is to say, Nicholas, in his what he was saying, talking, and both, I mean, Nance as well, and Anne, when she's talked about it, the gifted and talented among us becoming self-aware is ultimately what Bourdieu is talking about, right? Otherwise, it's naturalized. Otherwise, it's normalized. not just, oh, you're gifted and talented. No, but also that you've become addicted to a certain kind of recognition, that you became addicted to a certain kind of whatever. What we're trying to hone in on here, though, is the term incentive structure, because every field has its incentive structures. In those incentive structures, there's the explicit level, there's the employee handbook or the student code of conduct, there's the syllabus, that's all explicit.
Communist Manifesto.
Communist Manifesto. These are explicit levels, but there is also the implicit and obscene underside of ideology within and between all of these different institutions in the institutional matrix. Point being, we love to psychoanalyze ourselves or one another. Socioanalysis is great for doing exactly that, but there's this thing where no longer does your interiority become the thing that is the subject matter. No, your interiority is not the subject matter. The position in the field that you come from, currently occupy, or seek to occupy, that has a sort of gravitational effect on you. And so I think Nicholas had used the word habitus and said, I'm not sure if I'm using it right. You were using it right, as far as I could tell. Of course, we could always go deeper with any of these concepts, because every one of these concepts has layers of nuance that we can add to it. But at the basic level, we're talking about your beliefs, your habits, your presuppositions, the works. And so, your habitus is your embodied sort of way that you navigate the field that you're in. Or, of course, to be more Baudrillardian, we could talk about the sort of fractal, kaleidoscopic collision of fields here in the post-class fractured mass. But the point is you can't do philosophy, i.e. the examined life, if you're not practicing socioanalysis. Because we do live in the midst of all of these fields, and you do have all these things that you say to yourself and to others about why you do what you do. But if you can't own up to the incentive structures of the fields that you've navigated that got you here, and how you and everything you believe and do is somehow in lockstep with or against those incentive structures, and those structures are in fields and institutions that are objective and material, if you can't own up to that and if try to get down to that with other people, you're not going to, I don't know, I don't think you could really be honest with yourself is what I'm trying to get at. And so that's the main thing. Socioanalysis ties into all of this because we're talking about schooling. But people have anxiety about starting in the middle, always already being in the thing. They want, at least a lot of people, want the baby steps put forward. And this might be the thing that I was forgetting, that I was trying to get to with Wu, though I can't remember the thing that he said about it. But it feels like the biggest struggle for me this year has been that people want the roadmap and the definitive sort of like assignment thing. And I think it was like this idea of like intrinsic motivation that you were riffing on there, Daniel. It's like, no, the goal here for us to all become lifelong learners and to be able to do collaborative research, the goal is that fire inside and keeping it alive. And the wavelength is about we could call it the bonfire. How often do you actually come hang out around the bonfire? And which is to say, if someone like Daniel is on fire and he listens very intently and he's very good at focusing, but if he's not listening, he's talking, right? And that means that he has a fire. Now, I mean, he might not be listening or talking. He might be thinking, he might be writing, he might be reading, of course. But the point is like, yeah, some people, they really don't need some like log or some kindling or some gasoline, or so we can exhaust this metaphor. But there are a lot of people who are behind enemy lines in these various institutions, and their main goal is just to keep the spark alive because it's being smothered. And our job is to help show you can do that without doing a bunch of intro classes. You can do that without doing A, B, and C. No, you can just show up and warm your hands. Don't get too close, you'll get burnt. With me, at least, I promise. But that's there are people who are on fire and there are people who are just trying to keep it alive. And the containment or the limitations that other people want to apply, I'm all about imposing my own, but I think for the last few months, I've really tried to think, especially for this course that this lecture is a part of, the fundamental problems and core concepts. The reason I'm bringing this lecture in here in March is because the last 2 months of thinking, oh yeah, we're going to have assignments, is so unnatural to me. And it's unnatural to me because I'm not a product of the schooling system. And yes, I did great when I actually applied myself out of desperation and pure determination. I will do a great job at college, and then I will do a great job on my, yeah, I did, because I had something to prove or whatever. But I have no respect for those syllabuses. I did study them, and I did kick ass, and I did win. But I don't care, because I have my own intrinsic motivation. I know the things that I'm interested in, and I'm doing what I want to do. That's the end of the story. But then people are like, well, can you put it inside of a nice little series of sound bites and edit it all up and make it flashy and then gamify it so that we can all get pipelined into this? And it's like, you're trying to kill me, aren't you? You're like, you want me to die? Like, that's what it feels like. It feels like you want me to die. Why don't you give me an assignment? So I challenge every one of you listening to this, because we're about to move into a bit more of a discussion again, right? But here on my part 3 or 4 rant, which is a lecture, your assignment is to write me what kind of assignment you're going to give yourself for this lecture. Send it to me. What? Oh, you want a word length? How about this? 150 characters, just like good old Twitter. 150 characters, or is it 240? I don't know. 240 characters, or
12,000 words.
12,000 words. Yeah, exactly. So it's 120 characters to 12,000 words. That's your assignment. Come up with an assignment for yourself, and you can make it just for this lecture, or you can make it for this whole course. Set your own goals. And if you need an authority figure to verify it and tell you that you came up with a good one, don't bring that to me. Take it to your high school teacher that you respect. Because I don't know who that person is, but you apparently were impressed by somebody in that schooling system. You apparently think someone there is going to be impressed that you did something. So go talk to that person, please. Write this assignment up, not for me, but for that teacher in high school. And then once you've had that conversation with that teacher from high school or college or wherever, then we can talk about it some more. You can bring it to us and we'll all have a great conversation. But for right now, I want you to work it out with them, because like ultimately I think they're the one you're trying to impress. It definitely isn't us, because we don't care what you write about this unless it's something based like Will's piece about the Agora, which is just like a creative writing thing. Yes, of course, it does show that he's on the wavelength, that he gets it, that he clearly sat with the material and really thought about it. But the application of it is his own. Yeah. It's 100% his own, and that's why that piece just slaps. Is because it's completely out of left field for us. We're like, whoa, like it's like nothing in that piece was predictable.
Surprise.
It was surprise.
I think, going back to finding that wonder, that childlike wonder, kind of coincides with finding that talent in situ, in the moment. So when you're in a convivial space, you can actually discover not things that you're good at in an instrumental way, but things that you're good at because you care about them, because you're passionate about them, because they give you as much vitality as they take away from you. I am pretty Bataillean. I am always kind of concerned about metabolism, and folds and flows, and everything costs something, but also if it has no return, then it's probably just an empty commodity. But if it has a sustaining return, then you're probably barking up a better tree to be barking up. And talking about content, form, medium, how does the classroom change it? Well, the classroom is necessarily instrumentalized. Like the classroom is necessarily, you will learn this and then you will do that. But here in these spaces or non-spaces or places, or I don't know, words, the right one will show up eventually. It's not about the utility. It's, I think, maybe, ludus play, there's an element of that, but it's not that either. It's something else. It's something that has to be theorized. And that's what we're here to do. Thank you for joining us on the journey.
No, very well put. Something very important that Nicholas was bringing up, that to the degree that people feel some sort of drive within, it almost can feel like you were set up for a trap without time, energy, and ultimately without a society that allows you to bring intrinsic motivation into adulthood. Actually, like the society makes at a younger age, like when you're a kid, oh, you like art, you should be in art, right? It makes enough so that you go to where you are led to a sort of trap, actually, and then you'll never do that again. I'll never do that intrinsic motivation thing again. My parents said if I wanted to be an artist, I could, and I was, and then I was mocked, right? So and this is why, this is extremely important. This is why ultimately the question of intrinsic motivation, as I word it, actually is ultimately the question of how to create the conditions for a life of following it. Because if you can only do it till like you're 15 or 20 or 30, well then actually it could be a torture because you feel like you lost something, or it can feel like a trap, right? So very important, and I'm glad, Nicholas, because, and this is why, like also too, what's tricky when we're thinking about like situational addresses, to use a fancy phrase, good things, if not done in the entirety, actually become bad things, right? So intrinsic motivation in a society that actually is not going to allow you to do it for life, you could argue be better off not to have had intrinsic motivation, right? So that, because it's actually a torture, right? So this is where, it is this interesting, again, I just go back to the example with Beatrice, and there was this kind of classical idea. So in, I think, Canto 19, Dante asked Beatrice of the Paradiso, why don't you smile? And she says, well, if I smiled at this point, it would destroy you. Actually, and this is quite fascinating, because actually, obviously, Dante has gone through Inferno, and we assume in the Paradiso, oh, well, it's all joy. Well, Beatrice is actually saying, in the presence of good things, if you don't have the process to finish it, then you could be destroyed. So just because you get out of hell doesn't mean you get away from the possibility of Lovecraft, right? And what can actually happen is intrinsic motivation, if it doesn't have the conditions to complete the journey at the wheel within a wheel at the end, actually is your very intrinsic motivation without the material conditions to bring it to its fullness turns into a Lovecraft, like an ancient one that reduces you to ash. Actually, it destroys you, right? And so it becomes a torture. Now, there's also, to Nicholas, this developmental notion, like because extrinsic motivation, as the opposite, could be used to lead you into intrinsic motivation. It can be, but there has to be a very intentional facilitation. And also the problem is extrinsic motivation could get you out of the habit if you do it too long. But this is why everything requires the human judgment in the mean, right? In the transition, engaging in it, saying, okay, like, so for example, perhaps seeking social recognition at a young age where you're, say, want other kids to actually recognize you and you're not trying to be off could be a good thing if it can transition out of the need for that, right? But this is where you can't you have to be discerning and watching. And, Lucas brought up so well music. I'm always blown away in book 7, because the allegory of the cave is ultimately a kind of pedagogical, like a question of education. Like the Republic is almost an educational book. Plato says something so radical at the Socrates, Plato, at the end of book 7, where he's basically like, when kids are young, give them music, gymnastics, play, choir. Don't you dare give them books. Like, don't you dare give them books. They will hate them if you give them before 10. Like, players, like, don't give them books. Are you outside your mind? And what's so interesting is, why does he care about music? What does music teach? In choir, like, there's a big emphasis on choir. It teaches you a certain harmonization, we have different parts, and actually we can bring them together in a certain beautiful way, right? Yeah, that's right. So, and then you introduce ideas, because then you bring into math or philosophy or a horizon of harmony and bringing things together, so you don't get the dangerous specialization that removes the possibility of a clear. Also, once you hear the music, almost like the Oppenheimer movie, do you hear the music? Well, then actually you can maintain the intrinsic motivation through these disciplines and not get trained out of that, right? You can keep in mind the beauty. And there was also the wonderful point on all the Nicholas and beauty, like with Thomas Jock and I, we'll talk about beauty a lot. Obviously, Studebaker is talking about the good. There's this notion that if you lose touch with that, you also are going to lose touch, one, with intrinsic motivation, and also this thing that's going to make you keep going. Well, awe is so lovely because that's where that surprise of yourself, that feeling of awe, or wow, how is the conversation keeps going and unfolding, and there's always more to learn. There's a kind of awe at the certain infinity that can kind of come out. Plato wants to make sure kids start with that and that they do not lose that, right? But the problem is now is that if you get the taste of that and you don't have the time, energy, the material condition to keep with that, and then if you try to do it, the people around you look like aliens because they've been trained by conversational habits to not be able to keep that going, then actually this taste of the infinite almost becomes a torture, right? There's another notion in Dante that I think is very important in there, where it's the idea that the higher you climb in the Paradiso is, if the term is you turn your head, then it reverses. You go to the corresponding opposite. So the taller the glass, the more capacity to hold. But if it spills, then the more emptiness. Okay. So basically, if you have so the more you've actually tasted intrinsic motivation, if you lose it, then actually the emptiness is multiplied. Right. And so the issue is that one of the reasons I think basically people have not touched this topic or the education is because the stakes are so high, where if you get it wrong, it can actually intensify the torture. So we may say all day that we want people to be lifelong learners and be motivated themselves, but then we don't actually go about to make it possible because the stakes are high if you mess up, right? But there's no other way to save the human. Right. Like, this is a high stakes game. We have to actually do the work of cultivating intrinsic motivation, wonder, and awe, and then see how to see it through. Yep. And my final point would be this. When you're talking about the wavelength, I think a lot, my beloved Bernard Hankins, we talked a lot about cipher mentality, the hip hop cipher. Is there a introductory class you do to do a hip hop cipher? No, there's not like a sequence that you do to go into a cipher. And yet you do prepare for it, right? Yep. But the things you prepare, it's your own individual. I read this, I heard this, but I can't give you a list of the things you need to do good to be good at the hip hop cipher, right? You step in and everyone brings their own resources that they've gathered and they made it happen. Intrinsic motivation that ultimately doesn't find some sort of quote unquote cipher to plug into becomes destruction. That's ultimately what intrinsic motivation has to lead to, is some sort of cipher organization or cipher sort of lifestyle. Yeah. And please note, a conversation has a cipher structure. Yeah. Every interaction, every relationships all have cipher potential, hip hop cipher potential, right? And when you find that your intrinsic motivation can plug into that, well, then it doesn't turn into a Lovecraft. Right? It doesn't destroy you. It then excites you and you're wondrous. And then here's the thing. You, like, naturally, kids who get into hip hop, you'll have all these kids go and read Shakespeare just so they have wordplay to bring into the cipher. They'll go and read all these complicated books so they have material to bring to it. Like, when you get a kid who's in love with movies, they're studying like you can't stop them, right? Because they have something to bring it to. We do not have organizations, business, et cetera, that have a cipher structure. Yeah. They have a sequential structure, right? But a cipher is metaphorically, the cipher mentality is precisely when you ask, are there certain things I need to learn to play the game? The cipher is like, yes, no. Yeah. You have to bring something you've inner cultivated to it, but the cipher itself is not sequential. You in your own life journey had your own steps that you went into to cultivate your own self, but the cipher is devoid of a sequence. The problem is when intellectuals fall into the danger of language games or making sure they have the right interpretation, then what ends up happening is the organization itself becomes sequential, versus people have their own process of life to have certain resources they bring to the cipher. And that's the shift that has to occur. But then, of course, I like the cipher as an example because the cipher is something you prepare for. You cannot plan a cipher. You cannot plan a jazz improvisation. You cannot plan these things, but they're only possible because you're prepared for them, right? And because you're prepared for it, that's why when you go into these spaces, the magic happens, the human happens, the quality occurs, right? So ultimately, the question of intrinsic motivation right now, intrinsic motivations can be tortures to people because they don't ultimately have some sort of cipher to plug it into, especially a hip hop cipher is what a cipher would be, like a circle where you see hip hop artists gather in and they do freestyle rapping off the yes, we are ciphering right now, absolutely. I would absolutely associate deep conversation with a cipher structure. And it's opening up the pit. Yeah, it's opening up the pit. That's exactly right. And I think basically, if education that opens you up to the horizon that Plato is talking about is dealing with music, we shouldn't be surprised that the most useful metaphors to describe what we're getting at will be found in the music industry or will be found in art, right? Because it's a certain return to childhood with the RE in parentheses and different things, right? And so I think that we lack in our society conditions where people can ultimately connect their intrinsic motivations to some sort of cipher structure, and that's causing various tensions.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Clapping. Good job, man. Yeah, awesome. Wukas.
Beautiful, Luca.
After what Daniel said, I don't know if I should continue. No, I wanted to go back to Molly and Rothenberg and just say that there's, even though all of this, everything we and you are saying about schooling is depressing in a real way, there is also a kind of, I feel, a liberatory potential in actually reading. Can you hear my cat? She's okay though, fine. She's messing around. There is a liberatory potential I feel in reading guys like Gatto, in the sense that when you realize when he lays out to you the way you've been tricked, and we've all been tricked, there is a certain, I feel, anger which arises in because while you are in school, you are not really presented with, well, there are like alternative schools like Montessori or Waldorf, but you are not really, the only way you are you see learning is in this institutional machinery, like soulless, completely devoid of meaning way. But then when you actually realize that this was done differently, like homeschooling, like learning in a community, like actually engaging in leisure, and you were deprived of this, I feel that there is like a timos which like but the problem is that you, after you finish school, you are immediately put in this situation where you need to go work full time. And it's like it's a riddle, right? Like it's the whole riddle of Fury Underground, how to get out of this situation. But what I wanted to focus on mainly is, I hate this. Everyone has heard of this 10,000 hours rule, and how you can only get really good, like a master at something, after 10,000 hours. And yeah, it's generalized, and it's not true probably, and there is some real like merit to it probably with tutelage, but also it's a part of this like extreme mode of, you can only go and do something if that's the only thing you do, and you devote all of yourself to it. And how I said that this has some merit to it. You can only get good at something if you decide to go at it hard. But also, we were mentioning the childhood like wonder, and I feel like we are also deprived of the real potential of going to fuck around. Maybe there is a better term to say it, but like, after if you get some free time, you can go and try things, but there is this incentive that if you can't like capture yourself into it, like make it into something which will put you and make you work as a part of the recognition, money, things, then you shouldn't really go at it unless you can make yourself motivate yourself intrinsically or extrinsically to go 10,000 hours at it. So you should either not do it, or you should go into it already knowing, and you can't know this, that you will be able to get 10,000 hours done. It's a real conundrum, and I feel like in my life, this made me drop a lot of stuff. Not drop, but not go into a lot of stuff earlier, which I should have gone into. And now I would like everyone to just forget about this 10,000 hours stuff. Thanks.
Thank you, Ukas. I called Nance over here so I can point at the poster behind you. People, yeah, can you see that, Nance? Can you see the poster behind him on the wall there?
Yeah, dude.
Yeah.
The Polish poster.
The Polish Theory Underground poster with Timenergy and Underground Theory and a big old logo. Yeah, it's cool. It's very cool to see that back there. We're going to have a whole set of Luke's art available in poster format very soon here. So Luke, who's here right now, yeah. So he retroactively changed to the Tour Zero poster, which was a piece of shit I put together. And he made it instead now aesthetically match all of the other tour posters, because Luke's been doing all the posters since the American Idiots one, right? But Tour Zero was just my piece of crap poster. So he's retroactively made a better poster. And so now there's like a whole, like, it's just like a whole, like, I don't know, it's like a series of tour posters for TU, and it includes the TU Con poster that he made. So awesome that you did that, Luke, and very excited. Okay, now with all that said, I think we're about to close this thing down, but I wanted to say something also for the good of the order, and I think I'll probably need to remind you all of this, probably for the next 3 to 20 lectures, until it just becomes sort of ground into us all. But you might have not raised your hand up till this point, but you still have ideas and things that you kind of want to bounce around. It's just too much pressure to do it during the recording, during on the live side. And that's the need for the hallway conversation. Really, the hallway conversation was something that Rudy advanced back in 2023. And so what that means is when we're out of here, you can volunteer to be the person I give the room keys to, and then you just close up shop when you're done, which is just end the meeting when you're done. So if any one of you wants to stick around and potentially talk to anyone else who wants to stick around, just, say assign me in the chat and I'll assign you. So that's the first little order of business there. We've talked about a lot. It's worth touching on some of the big realizations that were made here, not only for the people who are coming in on the middle of this thing or at the end of this thing who might have missed the beginning, but also for those who, well, I mean, come on, repetition is the cost of learning. And so we started this with communication versus conversation. Now, for those who are watching the video version or listening to this on podcast, no, you didn't hear that part. That was in the kitchen before we came out here, right? But it's something that we're actually going to return and talk about much more in depth on Wednesday at 4:30 p.m. Mountain Time on the TU sheet, which is 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time. So we will be here again in this space at that time on Wednesday, talking about communication versus conversation. Well, I know for a fact we'll be bringing in a lot of Levinas, probably some Lacan, probably some, who knows, we might bring in some Norbert. Wiener. We might also bring in some Lumen. We might also bring in some Bourdieu, some Baudrillard. But don't worry, you don't have to have mastered any of these thinkers. They're over, much less, or they're of, much less, and have crammed some, I don't know, Wikipedia page.
Or read everything they ever wrote and then wrote your own book that says something that no one else has ever said about them before.
Yeah, you don't have to have done any of that. You can just come and it'll be fine. Because that is actually conversation as opposed to communication. And we'll get into it more. And I know that we'll be riffing off of this distinction between preparing and prepping. But that will be one of the ones that we do with my students from Sociology 122, Sociological Communication. So, of course, it's very fitting for them all. Tomorrow, the day before that, though, at 3 p.m. Mountain Time, which is 5 p.m. Eastern Time, we will be doing something with the other class that I'm teaching at Boise State, the sociological or Introduction to Sociology, Sociology 101. In that one, we'll be talking about tragic sociology, right? So it's going to be fantastic. On Thursday, chances are we might do something with the three of us, maybe Will, maybe Anne, maybe Benjamin Studebaker, who's going to be here with us physically.
Isn't that cool?
Yeah, he's going to be getting here, I think, on Thursday, right? Or we'll see. Tomorrow, maybe. Oh, maybe even tomorrow. We'll see. Yeah. So yeah, lots of cool stuff. Hold on. Nicholas says, Dave, you said don't let you forget to talk about Molly and retroversion. Just plugging this in just to double check you covered it as much as you wanted to. Thank you, Nicholas. I knew I was forgetting something. And I was hoping that if I tried to cover all my bases, someone would try to remind me of the thing that was missing. So once again, don't let me forget about that. But this distinction between prepping and preparing. Preparing for something. You're not quite sure what yet, versus preparing is much more controlling. It's like something specific. We're laying the groundwork for more things to come, or doing a clearing, for instance. Maybe the Agora is just a clearing for something else, right? People often think, oh, you guys are critiquing, but what's your solution? We're again, yeah. Was that again?
We don't like solutions. We're anti-solutionists.
Yeah, we are John the Baptist.
They found the final solution and it wasn't good.
It wasn't good, folks. The Jews didn't like it. No, I'm just kidding. Lots of people didn't like it. It wasn't just the Jews who didn't like it. Yeah, those are the queers. Yeah, those are autists. Yeah, no. No, the final solution, no final solution's ever been very good. Like, but also theorists who come along and they're all just about this one solution. Does anyone read them? I mean, are they really worth reading? No. And are most theorists remembered for their solutions? No, they're not. It's something else that we do when it comes to theory that maybe theory is actually about. Now, the last thing before I get to Molly and Rothenberg, though, is to say IIPI, the inextricable immersion of pseudo-immediacy is participation. So, but we can also have that P be a stand-in for primordial. And so what does that mean? Well, it means, I'd said early on, and of course this seems tangential, it's not though, I'd said that we were doing this little side thing about participation and how we've been talking about that, and there's like this positive form of participation, which I think we could also just call that engagement or interaction, I don't know, like play, like co-creation, the cipher, opening up the pit, like all of these things are kind of getting at that idea. But the kind of participation I said we should probably stop doing this thing with is Levy-Bruhl. Levy-Bruhl does not have to become a household name just for us to have conversations. Participation in the Levy-Bruhl sense is not something that we should have to say ever again. Levy-Bruhl, if you want to go there, sure, with the primitive mentality, and then of course you could always bring in Claude Lévi-Strauss with the savage mind. We could always talk about the problematic, Eurocentric, blah, 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 anthropology from the early 20th century or late 19th century. Sure, yeah, we can do all of that. But anthropology, especially back before there was such a thing as political correctness in the contemporary sense, because of course there was some kind back then, the kind of political correctness that we have today, it was not something they lived under, and so they were able to be more honest in their descriptions. At the point that everyone becomes all tangled up in like, oh my God, we've been so bad. We're so bad. We're so bad. Everyone becomes super neurotic about just describing things like, look at these people. They live in filth, like cockroaches. They've been debased to pure animality or something worse. They go, how dare you say that? It's like, I'm sorry, I'm just trying to describe the situation. So Levi Brule, not politically correct, definitely brings his Eurocentrism into the analysis somewhat. But also, I'm sorry, he lives in a house and other people live in mud. And he's saying, like, not only do they live in mud, but they murder their wife because she blinked twice when a person fell from a tree and broke their leg. And now they think that her blinking twice was the cause of that person falling from the tree. All Levi Brule is saying is that this is the primitive mentality where causality and logic and verification get mixed up in superstition. And of course, we're not above that. That's the real critique is like, we're not above that. That's where you want to bring in Adorno and Horkheimer with their work on the dialectics of enlightenment and etc. And of course, all critical theorists do this. Oh, that's fetishization, Marx will say, right? Well, what is he doing? He's doing the same thing. He's saying, oh, we think we're so beyond the primitive mentality, but here we are fetishizing these commodities. We have no idea that they actually come from somewhere, that there's actual processes of production, much less those relations that are necessary or generated by that mode of production. And so the point is that critical theory shouldn't, and I'm going to be very normative, and I'm just going to say, just to be simple, I'm just going to get the point across this way. I'm going to say critical theory should not shy away from saying we don't want to live like animals. Critical theory should not shy away from that. It should just say, well, we are living like animals. We just think we're not because we look over at the people who don't dress in suits or dress in clothes and we go, look at them. They blink twice and then the person falls from the tree and then they kill their wife. Terrible. Yeah, well, we can turn right around and go, look, this lady thought that God told her to drown her child, so she drowned her child in a bathtub. That's in America, actually. She was a Christian, right? So we've got a problem here too. Oh, this person thinks that they understand me because they read my palm or did a tarot, or now oh, you know my birthday, so now you know me? Like, well, guess what? We're here in the 21st century in a supposedly developed country. We're still doing it. That's the point. But we do it much deeper, and it's not just that we do it in this sort of deeper, harder to see way. It's also that the institutions have offloaded us doing it at all. At least the primitive mentality is still a mentality. But when you're just having the habitus of a consumer that goes along with the flow in the institutions, you're worse off. You're literally worse off. And you say, oh, trust the authorities. Okay, cool. Very nice. Very cool. Oh, you're so far? Yeah. Say that again.
You drink wine and you do think about where it comes from.
Maybe.
But you performatively think about where it comes from, so you don't actually have to get the critical distance to actually implicate yourself in where does it actually come from.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because these people like to drink wine but not think about where stuff comes from has been kind of one of our mantras since the American Idiots tour, especially. And, you know, it's because Europeans, they started it. It's their fault. We just perfected it. But, okay. So all that's to say, participation in the primitive mentality for Levi Brule. Participation is the inextricable immersion of pseudo-immediacy, primordial immediacy. I call it pseudo here. He doesn't call it that. I call it pseudo just because I'm trying to convey, we know it's not actual immediacy. There is still obviously the symbolic universe of those savages. Right? The point, or primitives, or natives, or how, it doesn't matter how you say it. We all know what we're talking about, and there's not a politically correct way to say it because we all know. And so, the point is like, no, that's not immediacy. Their relation to the icon, their relation to the gods, their relation to the wind, it's all symbolically coded. There's meaning in everything for them. Okay, and so. It seems like immediacy. We who live in a super mediated world where it's very obvious everything's mediated, it's very easy for us to just be like, oh, they live in immediacy. Oh, how nice would that be? Rousseau is just like, oh, they've got it made, man. No mediation. No, it's their immediacy is still mediated by the same transcendental subjectivity that Kant is talking about, by the same existentialia that Heidegger's talking about as he develops the concept of being in the world, as Deleuze is talking about when he gets down into the dogmatic image of thought. All those things still apply to the primitive person. So it's never unmediated. But the inextricable immersion of pseudo-immediacy for the primitive or the primordial person is, as I'm saying, IIPI, inextricable immersion pseudo-immediacy. What we're getting at is this thing Levi-Brühl calls participation. And all Levinas is getting at in the first half of Totality and Infinity, we're going to be doing the second half probably at the end of this year, but all he's getting at in the first half is like, we need separation. People are so like upset about alienation. They're so upset about isolation, atomization, individualism. People are so upset, oh, this is so bad because we're removed from that immediacy. Well, what Levinas is saying is like, yeah, but when you are constantly in the inextricable immersion of pseudo-immediacy, you don't discover the infinite depths of yourself through solitude. And so everyone's been thinking about solitude and solicitude a lot recently. We keep coming back to it. And of course, without time energy, you're not able to get solitude. And if you're not able to get solitude, you're not able to get solicitude, because the virtuous circle is between those two things, the genuine time with oneself and the genuine time with the others. The issue with the breakdown of that is we find ourselves here in this vicious cycle of ceaseless yammering with and for the non-committally curious who speak in ambiguous terms like they know what they're talking about, but in reality, they just want to define it so they can say they know it, and then they'll throw it. Oh, yeah, I was trying to throw it on the ground, but it kind of hit the base, but I think I didn't break anything. So pigeonholing, totalization, like that's the problem. And education becomes, oh, now I know it, so I don't have to care about it anymore. Yeah. And that's in the vicious cycle. And of course, for Heidegger, a way out of that vicious cycle is some kind of a confrontation with finitude, thinking about like, oh, I don't have forever. And everything I've ever cared about will cease to be. And my projects could end tomorrow. Theory Underground could be impossible tomorrow. I could get, Will could say, fuck you, Dave. All right, I'm done with you. Lobotomize me in my sleep. Bye, it's over. We're done here. You know, good luck. Have fun, everybody, without me. I'm going to be like this, drooling. Except maybe not. Maybe I'd be way cooler. Like my personality's just way better. I'm also like way smarter all of a sudden. We don't know. It's possible. We might want to try it out. But our projects are fragile and precarious, and everything's finite. And so like coming to terms with that helps you break out of that ceaseless, what's trending, I need to have an opinion on it so I can move on to the next thing. And instead, we commit to things and try to get to the bottom of them, right? Well, for Heidegger, I mean, he's a little extreme. He goes off the deep end. He really thinks being his whole life. And it's like, well, we're all juggling a lot more threads, maybe, you know? And so I think what we're trying to do is find some other thing besides just committing to like one thing that you go super deep into forever. We're instead thinking about, but how do we, because we'll not get our time energy for real, we won't get it for real. So then without that, what's good enough? And the thinking about what's good enough in terms of solitude and solicitude, well, here we have solicitude, I think. I think that we're all in this space of solicitude right now. So, but it's not perfect, and it's not as good as it could be because it's iterative. It doesn't all happen at once. It happens over time. So how long until you have another moment like that? Or how long until I have another moment like this, right? It seems like we'll probably have quite a few in the next few days here. Well, Sherry Turkle in Reclaiming Conversation, she seems to assume something, and that is that it starts at solitude. But something that I raised a couple weeks ago, I think you might have been there, Will, when I raised it with my students, and I think Anne was there. Maybe it doesn't have to start in solitude. Maybe you learn how to have a conversation with yourself by first becoming a participant in solicitude, by slipstreaming other people who are clearly doing it. So if you think that we've been doing it and you're like, wow, they're doing it, Well, just by listening in, by eavesdropping, you are slipstreaming people engaged in that process. And by seeing other people have rich, deep conversation, and of course, you don't have to do this for Theory Underground. You can do this for all kinds of podcasts. It actually might give you the ability to then sit with yourself and have more real conversations with yourself.
So the mimetic, extrinsic motivation can become this intrinsic motivation. We're not totalizing. We're not doing black and white thinking here, folks.
Yeah, and like a little kid, for instance, can, following mama or dada around, learn how to do things on their own. They can become confident in their abilities because they've just mimetically learned to do what you're doing, but then they spent enough time around you. They understand implicitly the difference between we're doing this thing where we're all engaging with one another, and they also can see, oh, we're all just doing our own thing. And learning how to do your own thing with an authority figure who's not interested in what you're doing, but is just doing their own thing, and now you're doing your own thing. That's also learning how to be in solitude with yourself. And so that now when you're alone, you don't feel abandoned and bored and depressed. No, you're like, cool, there's like so much room for activities in my day. And if you don't know that that's a riff off of Step Brothers, then you've got homework to do. All right. It might not be a canon in the PCFM, but Step Brothers comes pretty close to canon, right? I mean, it's basically Shakespeare. So, yeah. We do need separation from participation in the sense of the inextricable immersion of pseudo-immediacy. We do need separation, and it's through that separation we discover our depths, and in discovering our depths that we are then able to go out to the other with something to offer, but also it's only then that we can, by discovering your own depths and the ability to surprise yourself, you realize others are like you. Sondering comes in. Sondering being the overwhelming sort of like, whoa, other people have their own lives? And like you look at the cityscape as it goes by and you're just like, wow, there's a lot of people in there. And they also have infinity? Holy cow. But not everybody's aware of that infinity. And that's what education is about, is learning to love that and be passionate about it and share it. So thank you, everybody. This is really great. Really, really loved having you all here. I'm going to close this thing out now. For the people, Nicholas, retroversion. He said, retroversion. All right, do you have a copy of The Excessive Subject handy? It's funny that we're going to do this at the very end, like a quilting point. Does anyone want to read the first paragraph from, if you could read it, Nicholas. Read the first paragraph of Žižek, since we just saw him the other day, just yesterday.
Okay, so it's Zizek's intro that you want the first one? Just to say that back.
I think I'll have you read the first paragraph of Slavoj's, and then we'll have you read the first couple of Molly's. Yeah.
Okay. Molly Rothenberg's book opens with a reference to Italo Calvino's A Beautiful March Day, a story about the death of Julius Caesar. In his idiosyncratic description of the conspiracy, Calvino focuses on the unintended consequences of the act of killing Caesar. While the conspirators wanted to kill a tyrant and thereby restore Rome to its republican glory, their act effectively abolishes the very conditions which sustained its intended meaning. As Rothenberg explains, the very world in which it made sense to get rid of Caesar also vanishes with those dagger strokes, not because Caesar held that world together, but because the assassins could not foresee that their act would also transform the way the act itself would later be judged, even by themselves. They could not factor in the historicity of their action. Neither they nor anyone else could predict or govern how the future would interpret the assassination. Put another way, we could say that there was simply no way for them to take into account the retroversive effect of future interpretations. What we encounter here is the key feature of the symbolic. This passage renders the fundamental openness of the symbolic introduces into a closed order of reality. Once we enter the symbolic, things never simply are, they all will have been. They, as it were, borrow part of their being from the future. Rothenberg evokes a wonderfully cruel example of a tender statement. Karl smiled as he gently stroked the velvety skin of his lover, completed by a supplement which brutally changes the meaning of the first part, with the keen edge of a knife. And as Rothenberg points out, the cause of this irreducible openness of the symbolic is not its excessive complexity. We never know in what decentered context our statement will be inscribed, but the much more refined, properly dialectical impossibility of taking into account the way our own intervention will transform the field. The speaking subject cannot take into account the way it is itself counted in the signifying series. With regards to its own inclusion, it is irreducibly split, redoubled. Or, to quote a joke often mentioned by Lacan, I have 3 brothers, Paul, Robert, and myself.
Thank you. Yeah, and I didn't realize how good it is. Okay, so I don't know if it's a joke. Okay, the reason I wanted you to read the first paragraph of Slavoj's Foreword and then the first paragraph of Molly Ann Rothenberg's, what is it, the introduction or is it chapter? I think it's the introduction, is because he just says what she says. Yeah. He just said what she's gonna say, and it's kind of, I think he's playing with retroversion, because like when we talk about repetition being the cost of learning, the point is even though it was all there and you read it, it doesn't actually click until you read it again. So instead of sitting there and doing what he normally does, no, he just does. So when you read it, it's like deja vu, and it's really fun. And so you got a great reading voice. You did a great job on that, Nicholas. I'd love if you would just read maybe the first I don't know, at least 3 paragraphs, maybe 5, but kind of we'll feel it out. But it's gonna be, everyone, it's basically the same thing, but I do want you to hear it from her. Molly Ann Rothenberg is someone I was really hoping to meet at LAC conference. She is a regular there, but she wasn't there this year. Dang. Next time, hopefully. Jennifer said that she's awesome, so yeah, can't wait to meet her. But go for it. All right, let's do this.
Okay. And yeah, just cut me off anytime. All right, introduction, the excess of everyday life, opening with a quote. Withdrawing my dagger, I'm overcome by a sort of vertigo, a feeling of emptiness, of being alone, not here in Rome today, but forever after, in the centuries to come, the fear that people won't understand what we did here today, that we won't be able to do it again, that they will remain distant and indifferent as this beautiful, calm morning in March. Italo Calvino, A Beautiful March Day. The senators who damned Julius Caesar as a tyrant argued that killing him was the only way to liberate Rome. In their logic, we find the most common gesture of every political program and every call for social change. Identify a problem, locate its cause, and then eliminate that cause to solve the problem. This logic seems so self-evident as to be virtually tautological, but Calvino exposes its flaw. Killing Caesar not only eliminates the tyrant, it changes the conditions by which that action acquires its meaning. The very world in which it made sense to get rid of Caesar also vanishes with those dagger strokes, not because Caesar held that world together, but because the assassins could not foresee that their act would also transform the way the act itself would later be judged, even by themselves. They could not factor in the historicity of their action. Neither they nor anyone else could predict or govern how the future would interpret the assassination. Put another way, we could say that there was simply no way for them to take into account the retroversive effect of future interpretations. Retroversion is one of the most common but least acknowledged forces in human social relations. We encounter it in every use of language. When you read that, Karl smiled as he gently stroked the velvety skin of his lover, You may find your initial picture of this apparent love scene altered irrevocably by the next phrase, with the keen edge of a knife. Using language means making constant adjustments as the field of meaning widens, narrows, and then circles back on itself. The opportunity and the need for such adjustment is ever present, but has unpredictable effects. One person may be jolted out of a chain of associations, forced to reevaluate the beginning of that chain by a word that has no particular effect on another person. It is easy enough to imagine a reader who would not read the first phrase as a love scene, but rather as the opening of a horror story. Such a person may not be vulnerable to the kind of blunt retroversion that would otherwise strike at the mention of the knife. At the same time, we could imagine another reader for whom every word in the first clause works backwards, to warp or inflect the words that precede it, even before the knife makes its appearance. For example, the reader might at first imagine velvety skin to be referring to Carl's own body, and would then rework the whole scene from auto-stimulation to interpersonal sexual relations at the moment of encountering the word lover. But once the jolt occurs, the opening of the sentence, the opening that sets us up for the jolt down the line, will be transformed permanently in this retroversive movement. In a kind of Back to the Future scenario, the original causes, words such as smile and stroked, are altered in their significance by the effects they produce. Time seems to loop back on itself. Were we to consider the difference between the way a heterosexual and a homosexual reader might imagine the scene, we could explore another set of possible retroversive effects. In other words, the very conditions by which these sentences acquire their meaning shift not only as we add words and phrases, but also as the particularities of the people involved are taken into account. When we read or talk with each other, we make just such, often minute or unconscious, adjustments to the phantasmatic dimension of our associative chains, and to those we postulate as operating in our interlocutors.
Perfect, man.
Well, cool.
Perfect. Yeah, that's really good. Thank you. Everyone give it up for Nicholas. Nicholas has a future for sure in the world of the new field that we're all taking over, right? Nance is, I guess I was technically the first to do it with my own book with Waypoint, but I was just kind of getting it done. Nance has actually made an artisan sort of thing. But what are you doing? Can you tell everyone what they can go find on Audible right now? We are officially breaking out into the big leagues, boys. Check it out.
Yeah, like 4 days ago, I think. Todd McGowan's recent book, Embracing Alienation, went live on Audible. It's not the first good book I've read on Audible. The first good book I read on Audible was the first book I read on Audible, and that was Timenergy. I think I'm going to do some promotion for that, because why not? Because we didn't promote it.
That book is still not being promoted.
Yeah, that book was not promoted. But yeah, you can go to Audible. You can get Todd's book, Embracing Alienation, read by me. We're hoping to take over the scene. We're hoping, we don't want to live on LibriVox and YouTube and just anarchist reading circles. We want to be legitimate. Audible is the big show for audiobooks. We know that thinkers around the world rely on audiobooks. So we want to take over the scene. We want to get theory, philosophy, art, books worth reading / listening to. It's not really that different if you know what you're doing. We want to flood the scene with good books. And yeah, Nicholas, you do have a great reading voice. Wu-Tang.
Matthew said, "My daughter pooped in her diaper. Now I'm gonna drop now." How embarrassing for her. I mean, we didn't need to know. I mean, don't tell her you told us. That's my main. When she's older and we meet her, do not tell her that we knew that she pooped. We will not. He's like, this is how I get my revenge against her. I will tell everyone, you pooped. You were little. You pooped. There are people who say, I remember you in diapers. It's like, could you shut the fuck up? That's none of your business. You shouldn't have been looking at me. That was none of your business. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. But no, Nicholas, if you or anyone else with good reading voices wants to get gooder at that, then you know who to talk to. There's a whole, it is kind of like, you know, a DIY sort of like, you can just kind of say, oh, I would love to read this book or that book. And then if you put in the ask, they might say you can. And in this case, it wasn't just for some David McKerracher Timenergy type of book. No, this is a straight up repeater book, which, I mean, at the point that he's done a repeater book, well, now he could probably do a verso book. At the point that he can do a verso book, he could probably do a Routledge book. At the point he could, et cetera, et cetera. And that's what we mean by taking over the scene, because YouTube, I'm sorry, there's a lot of people doing theory on YouTube. There's not a lot of people doing this on Audible, though. There's a lot of Slavoj Žižek books. How many are actually available on Audible? Like 2? Maybe 2. If you look up Slavoj Žižek on there, you're going to see Timenergy as like the 3rd thing. Why? It's because his name doesn't come up very often. That's crazy. Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit is on there, though. Someone read that. Mind-blowing to me that that's actually on there. And this might feel like a tangent, but it's not, because people get freaked out by reading. They get freaked out by listening. They get freaked out because they're not getting it all. They feel overwhelmed. They feel anxious. They feel depressed. They feel inferior. Or they're that cool kid who's got it. But no, most of us aren't. Most of us have to read it and reread it and reread it. The rumination approach is actually probably the way that it's always worked. And doing it aloud was how it was mostly done throughout all time. We all started as oral cultures, and then at the point that writing got introduced, it was because we were supposed to read it aloud and sit around and think about it, and then eventually do commentaries on it, as Matthew pointed out. And so I know he's had to go, but yeah, he pointed out that actually when Aquinas was writing the Summa Theologica, no, he was doing it for people who would write commentaries on it, not dissertations. And so the commentary is a very different kind of thing that we haven't been practicing here either. What if we were doing exegeticals and commentaries? That's much more kind of the roots of writing itself, reading itself. And so if you feel overwhelmed when you hear a robot reader going really fast and you're like, I'm not getting it all, great. Or if you hear Nance reading and you're like, oh, I'm not getting it all. I get distracted. I think of other things. What, you don't get distracted when you're reading books? Stop being a perfectionist. There's no such thing as total comprehensive recall of the entire thing that you read. Everyone gets distracted when they read a book. Everyone gets distracted when they listen to audiobooks. All of these things are just comprehension muscles. They must be developed if you are to take over your life and claim your agency, stand on dignity, and fight for our nobility. So thank you, everybody. And retroversion is the key to overcoming that anxiety. Love you guys. Take care. I hope that you'll stop by and say hi in the premiere. To the people watching the premiere, we love you. All right, take care. Bye-bye.
We cannot do direct revolution, but the only way to lay the foundation for it is to do what you are doing to move the underground. It's a theoretically correct title.
Theory Underground exists to cultivate the conditions necessary for a working-class intellectual renaissance that goes beyond old political categories or other identitarian niches. At TU, autodidact workers with earbuds and professionals who see no future in existing institutions or movements are able to challenge their doxa and develop an understanding of the situation we are in.
If you subscribe at theoryunderground.com, you'll get access to a package of courses, including my Intro to Fault Line Theory, which includes Intro to Nick Land and Intro to Slavoj Žižek. These courses are being woven with the 3 courses that take place on a month-to-month basis, spread out throughout the year of 2025. Those courses are 12 Core Concepts and the Fundamental Problems with the Situation Today with social theorist David McKerracher, 12 Essential Political Thinkers with political theorist Benjamin Studebaker, and The Philosophy of Nature with philosopher Nina Power.
The way these all get woven together at a deeper and more meta level is through the ongoing research seminars led by David McKerracher, Benjamin Studebaker, and Michael Downs, where they engage with one another's work by sharing developments from their own perspectives, theory, and research.
If you subscribe at higher levels and support our work, we'll support your development with bespoke teaching.
Alone and unaided, we struggle to grasp our situation in its fullness and formulate a meaningful response. By working together and pooling our energies, we can do better. Join us at theoryunderground.com/subscribe.
There'll be two kinds of people in 10 years. Those who said, I knew all along Theory Underground was going to make this huge difference. Those are the people that are like Nance, who were on the sidelines at one point and then said, nah, I'm going to get in. I'm going to roll up my sleeves and I'm going to go hard. And then there's another kind of person, a person who waits in the wings, collects receipts, and who will say in 10 years, oh yeah, I was there. I saw that happen. And then they'll gossip monger. Listen, if you want to get involved, get involved. But if you're going to sit there in the bleachers, well, here's some popcorn. I hope you have fun.